Hello everyone, the first post novella November live stream. We are so back and it feels good. To be back. How's everyone doing? Hello, long time no see. It's been like 2 weeks. Isn't that crazy? Feels like it's been forever. November went through like bam, we were done. We had done 4 weeks of writing. Margot, hello. We done 4 weeks of writing. Felt like it went by in the blink of an eye. Now it feels like it's been a lifetime since we've been doing live streams again, at least for me. Life comes at you fast. For everything else, there's writing theory. Hello. Hope everyone's doing well. Hope December's treating you well. It's been a chilly couple days over here in Wisconsin. We had a high of 6 yesterday and a low of -6. And then the feels like was like -20 something. Windy, cold day. Your boogers freeze as soon as you go outside. A whole different life. Also, going out right now, we have our Friday video just posted, 4 p.m. It's a good one. I hope you guys have a good time with it. Check it out after the live stream if you would like. It's got a fun intro. And this is the first video that can officially play its audio in another language. YouTube rolled out this new feature where you can sort of have the audio dubbed. Almost like, I'm pretty sure how it works is, you know, they generate the closed captions when you upload the video. So there's like a text file somewhere that has all of the words that you're going to say according to YouTube on the video. Hello, Stefan. Hello. And now it just translates that and plays another voice. It cuts out my voice and replaces it with German Carson or with Italian Carson. You haven't met Italian Carson? He's pretty suave. Portuguese, Spanish. I feel like there's 1 or 2 more, but that's kind of cool. It's the dubbing in real time. It is. So it actually is weird. It processes the audio of the video to remove my actual speaking voice and then replaces it with the dubbed voice. But, you know, YouTube closed captions are not always perfectly lined up. And since it kind of uses that as the prompt for what, you know, when to play my new dubbed voice, it doesn't always match up perfectly, but it's pretty good. Stefan, it is going well. I haven't done as much writing as I did during Novella November, but I've done some. I've been enjoying the holidays, enjoying the cold. We have a local hockey team here. It's always fun to go out and support. The wonders of Northern life. Let me tell you about what we're doing today. Today's going to be a fun one. Hold on, let me grab my prop. Today's going to be a fun one because we're looking at Starlight Farms Kennel for Talking Dogs. Justin, hope you enjoy the live stream later. Enjoy your nap. We're looking at Starlight Farms Kennel for Talking Dogs. And basically, we're doing what's called a total story breakdown. This is going to be, let me switch over here. This is going to be us talking about the writing experience. As I wrote this book, I kept real-time notes, basically, about the challenges I was facing, the thought process I had in doing X, Y, and Z. And after I finished my proto draft of Starlight Farms, I sort of consolidated all of those notes into a 50-page PDF to share with you all. And then after I went through the editing process, I went back to that story breakdown I'd written up and I added to it and I refined it to paint the picture of that whole journey. And then after I published this whole thing, I went back to that story breakdown and again added more content about what I had learned, misconceptions that I had. The goal for this, and this is kind of like the whole idea behind writing theory. The goal for this was that I understand. Here, you know what? I understand that sometimes you pick up a writing book, you crack it open, and you're reading all this kind of like writing advice, writing philosophy, and there's a little bit of a disconnect because what they put in that book is so general, right? And you're always left thinking, at least I am, always left thinking like, how do I apply what Stephen King's telling me or Anne Lamott's telling me or Ursula K. Le Guin's telling me? How do I apply that to my story? Because I see my story in this totally different light. So my purpose for this whole thing was write the book and have this story breakdown available so you can see directly how the process I went through, the lessons I learned, the things I messed up on are reflected in the book, and to have a very quick one-to-one sort of comparison between the writing advice that you're seeing in this, the thought process, the philosophy behind it, and how it actually affected the book that I wrote very specifically. Stefan says, why do you write? That's the video that just came out today. I don't know anymore. I no longer have the drive. You know what? I bet if you watch that video after this live stream, of course, you might find some answers in there that give you the motivation maybe you never considered before. Maybe after the live stream, we'll pull it up here and watch it ourselves. We'll see. We'll see. All right, so what's on the agenda for today? I whipped up this fun little PowerPoint presentation, and just because it's a PowerPoint doesn't mean that we're doing anything super fancy here. In this, we're going to talk about this story breakdown PDF that I made. Mr. Slothman, hello, hello. We're going to talk about this PDF that I made, where you can get it for free, what's in the PDF, and then we're going to talk, just to get everyone on the same page, a story synopsis of this book. That will include spoilers because we are going into this with the knowledge that, like, yes, you can pick up this book, you can read it, hopefully you have a good time, right? But what we're doing today is looking at it not as this book to pick up and read, but as a way to learn more about our writing process. So I will be talking about the ending of this book. I will be spoiling it. In my personal opinion, it's really valuable to talk about writing in this specific way. So your mileage may vary. I am open. A lot of times spoilers don't affect the journey of the book, in my opinion. That can change when a book is the whole book's purpose is about something like a plot twist. That's not the case here. After that, we're going to open up my Scrivener file. And for anyone here who uses Scrivener or is curious about Scrivener, or anyone who is looking for, like, what is the writing tool that, sort of, I don't want to say the pros are using, but Scrivener is definitely one of those kind of software where it is designed specifically for the long form creative writer, versus something like a Google Docs, which has to be very general purpose, or something like a Microsoft Word, which may have started really focused on long form, writing, but has evolved to then become more general purpose. Scrivener, top tier. I do have a link in the description to the book if you're interested on picking it up and supporting the channel, but also to Scrivener. If you haven't used it before, Scrivener has a dope free trial policy. You can download the full Scrivener and use it for 30 days, but it's 30 days that you are opening up the software and using it, right? Not 30 days from when you download it, but 30 days of use. It doesn't require hardly anything. You don't have to put credit card information in or anything like that. And then if you do decide to pick it up, it's a one-time payment, and they just send you a code. You unlock that software on your computer to continue using it after that 30 days. You can also use that same code for installation on multiple machines. So, big fan of Scrivener. It's nice to not have to pay monthly for a piece of software that you don't even own. You know what I'm saying? So we'll be looking at how I use it for organization, for planning my story, for drafting my story, and for editing my story. Then we're going to talk about publishing. This is going to be also focusing a little bit in on the thing that Scrivener does better than other things, which is compiling your story, which is how you can output it as like an ebook to put on your Kindle, or a PDF to share with someone, or a Microsoft Word doc if you want to bring it over somewhere else. Got lots of cool tools there. Then we'll talk about covers and titles, blurbs, other tools, and publishing on Amazon and my thoughts on that, whether it was good or bad, what I would do differently, would I do it again? Then we're going to talk about the story specifically, what things went well, what things were good about Starlight Farms Kennel for Talking Dogs. But we're also going to talk about the things that I knew still needed to be improved before publishing it. And then also the mentality behind, at some point you have to be done with your book. And all the perfectionists out there, that this goes to you. This is for you. At some point when you're writing your book, you're gonna have to be like, okay, it's time to send this out and it's time to stop editing. It's time to stop tweaking. No, don't add that one more scene that you think is gonna make this other moment that much better. You have to ship it out. So we'll talk about that whole idea of, you know, how do you put something out in the world that could potentially still be even better than it currently is? And then lastly, any residual questions that we want to talk about. This is not a formal thing, right? I have a little PowerPoint just to keep myself organized. But like, let me know what you're thinking in chat. Let me know what questions you might have, right? Let me know if you want me to expand on anything. If you disagree with something, if you think I'm an idiot. Well, you know what? Keep that one to yourself. But I encourage you to come join me for the ride. All right, so here's the deal. Let's talk about the PDF and the story. Hell Jumper, hello, welcome to the party. Let's talk about the PDF and the story. So first things first, if you are here because you want this story breakdown, this is totally free. To kind of tell you what the story breakdown has, here's just like a tiny little screenshot I took. I also wrote this in Scrivener and exported it and everything, but what the story breakdown is gonna show you is just sort of like the progress of this book from first draft, or, you know, proto draft to first draft to final draft. So like, for example, I talk all the time about the idea of writing a temporary beginning because you know you're gonna change it after you know your story that much better and your characters that much better. So in the story breakdown, I include things like, here's my original intro, the original beginning for the story in its proto draft, and then how I changed it and why I changed it and my thoughts around what I was purposefully trying to do in this new introduction. That's kind of what the PDF has. I will open it up on page or on the live stream just to point out a few things. If you want this PDF, it is in the Discord. It is in the Discord. You can go down, join the Discord, join 450 something writers, I think is what we're at now, who all want to talk about story. You can join the Discord, go check out the live streams channel, and there's a button to download this. No strings attached. I'm not trying to do anything crazy here, just in case you want it. That's in the live streams channel in the Discord. If you're not part of the Discord, there's a link below. That's what's in the story breakdown. And it's everything from like, how did I come up with my idea? How did I organize that into something I could then write? And then what was the writing process like? It's great. So before we get much further, in order to really understand the story breakdown, we need to understand the journey that it took for us to get there and the story itself. So one of the cool things about Scrivener is like I can keep track of every day that I wrote in Scrivener, what kind of progress did I make. So here, I know I'm cutting off a little bit of it. You can see it took me just under 2 months to write and finish this entire proto draft. And this came out to be maybe 40 something thousand words. I know when you crunch the numbers up here, it's like 58,000, but it actually came out after backspacing and adding new things and shifting things around. The proto draft came to about 44,000 words, I think. When I started writing this book after I started my YouTube channel. And that's important because I was preparing for doing a video where I was looking at a bunch of different writing tools that exist out there. And I was going to be like, hey, you know, what are the pros and cons of these different softwares? Wow, look at this, you know, such an original idea. But I actually started writing this book while testing these other softwares. So once I realized this was a story I actually wanted to write, I took the 23,000 words I already had and then put it in Scrivener. So I imported that in, and then you can see most days that I wrote in this proto draft, we're talking, you know, maybe 2,000-ish words. Some days I was able to really buckle down and write like 4,000 words. But the further I got in my proto draft, the more excited I was to write, because I was really starting to figure out who these characters were. And so you can see I had a 4,400 word day, 2,800 words, 2,200 words. And then at this point, I was like, I can see the ending, right? I'm drafting, I'm getting all my words down. I know I'm getting towards the end of the book. So like these last 4 days that I was writing were maybe like 15,000 words in those 4 days. Feels good when you're like, when you see the ending, you know, when you're like, I'm finally gonna finish this dang story. So that's kind of a cool thing to see. And this was meant to be a novella. So I wasn't shooting for a huge word count, which is why it came out to be like 44,000 words. So what is this story? For those who don't know, Starlight Farms Kennel for Talking Dogs. This is a spoiler stream. Spoilers, by the way. This is a book about found family. This is a book where there's magic leaking from the nearby Luminara Keep. This is cozy fantasy, by the way. We'll talk about genre stuff in a second. That's leaking out magic into the world and having unintended consequences. And so one of those things that's happening is, dang, there's like a whole drought happening. But another thing that's happening is that it started to tweak the world in weird ways, including some animals have started talking, including in our book, some of our main characters, some dogs. Our main characters are Rachel and Marcus, who are farmers themselves. It's been a rough year to be a farmer in the midst of a famine. They have a farm of fairy apple trees, just pulled that out of thin air. And Rachel is very much an animal lover. So when other struggling farmers, in some cases, find that they have these talking dogs that have been part of their families for years, but now can suddenly talk. Well, when you have to decide between maybe selling that dog and saving your farm, you have to make tough decisions. And Rachel encounters someone bringing their dog into the city to sell them for study by the alchemists in the city, and chooses to buy that dog instead and save that dog from going to a stranger's place where who knows what kind of life they'll have. And this cascades into a few different dogs, but also puts our own farm into jeopardy. And then at some point, we're like, oh crap, you know, there's this heavy, this levy that's going to be happening, this tax. It's going to be happening. Are we going to lose our own farm? And we talk about how great, you know, what a home means, what it's like to have a home, why it's important to have a home, and the memories that you make in a home. And we might be losing it. So our last hope is to go to this Night Moon Festival where normally Marcus and Rachel sell fairy apples. But this year, they bring the talking dogs at the behest of our antagonist. And things go very, very wrong. And Goose and Barky and Baguette, which we'll talk about those names, which are so funny to me, go through a big journey in this book. And at the end, they all find a nice, happy ending. So that's kind of the idea of the story. Of course, this is the kind of story that's built all around the character interactions. This is a very character-driven book. It's not something that has this super robust world that we're meant to explore like other fantasy books or other science fiction books. This is all about the characters. It's all about exploring this idea of talking dogs, right? Now, let's talk about where that idea came from. And to do this, we need to hop over to the story breakdown PDF. Again, you can find that in the Discord. So in our story breakdown, again, I kept track of everything from start to finish, including, if I scroll down here, the idea and planning. Where do story ideas come from? You know, one of the videos I made, I think maybe 4 or 5 months ago, that still seems to get good traction. I like that. I see a baguette and a duck and a log. It's pretty close. One of the videos I put out a couple months ago that seems to still be getting good traction is how do you come up with story ideas? So I'll even ask right here for everyone who's joining us, how do you come up with your story ideas? What inspires you? What are the typical things that inspire you to then want to form an entire story around it. Because I have a very specific kind of way to phrase this, but I would love to hear your thoughts. Because I think a story requires two specific ideas. And those two ideas can be just about anything. And always what I quote here is Stephen King coming up with Carrie, which is, he read a Time magazine article on teen cruelty and then another one on telekinesis and was like, dang, what if we put those two things together? And then he wrote Carrie, and it was a big hit. But I think the idea of you need to have two ideas to smash them together to make something unique is pretty important in the space of creative writing. Now you could say, I'm James Patterson, and I'm gonna write another story about Alex Cross solving a mystery, and his family is put into danger. Those aren't really two unique ideas. Yeah, you're right. You know, if you're James Patterson, maybe you don't need two unique ideas to still be able to write something interesting or thrilling. But I think for the most part, when you're inspired to write, it's because you've said, I love the fantasy genre. And also, I love dogs. What if I smashed them together? For my case, and I write about this in here, I had just read the book, The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. Here, I can zoom in for you guys. Hello. I had just read The Priory Tree by Samantha Shannon. And here's the deal. Here's the deal. The Priory of the Orange Tree is an epic fantasy book. And I read a lot of epic fantasy. I'm in book 7 of Malazan Book of the Fallen. You know, I've read the Stormlight Archives. I've read parts of the Wheel of Time. I've hit all of these big fantasy series, and I love epic fantasy. But I think everyone at some point suffers from genre burnout. You know what I mean? When you're just kind of sick of that genre, you're seeing the same things over and over again. Sure, you know what I mean. Hello, Katie. And Asterisk says generally about how you come up with ideas. Generally, I decide that I think people need to hear something, which makes up the themes and the general plot. And for the rest of it, I use my creative mind to tell it in an interesting way. That's a great way, Asterisk. It's a great way. I think maybe this idea of smashing two ideas together, maybe that's more important in terms of like a science fiction and fantasy, because the more I think about a general fiction story, especially like a literature fiction, it's less about combining the ideas and more about portraying, like I'm thinking like East of Eden is more about portraying a message, right? So maybe there's a difference between general fiction and other genres for the kinds of stories you want to tell. In a lot of my cases, I'm inspired by saying, here is one idea, here's another, let's smash them together and create something totally unique. For the book I've been writing for Novella November, I have this interesting location of Whittier, Alaska, which everyone in the town lives under the same roof in this apartment complex and is isolated from everyone else. And then the idea of like, okay, well, what would happen in this town that would cause a murder that's then covered up and needs to be solved? Smash those together and you have something that seems rather interesting to me. Just Guy says some say that some say you should figure out the theme later once you see a pattern. That is something that both Stephen King and Anne Lamott say in their writing books, On Writing and Bird by Bird, respectively, is that write the story first and sort of discover the theme for what you're trying to say. But then, and this is, I like the way that Stephen King says it. He says that then he goes through the story and he strengthens that theme, but more importantly, he trims out things that go against that theme. And that just helps reinforce that, which is, I think in my mind, I don't approach the theme until I know more what the story is about. And I think that's kind of the idea behind that advice. But I do think you can always go the other way if you have a strong theme that you want to emphasize. And again, that may be a genre dependent thing. Let me know what you think. This guy says, because if you try to write based on a theme, you end up with a lot of cliches. I don't know if I agree with the idea if you try to write a certain theme, you end up with cliches. I do think if you try to write a specific genre and that's really your main driving force before you found your identity of the story, I can see that leading to a lot of genre cliches. But also, there's a great video on tropes and cliches at writingtheory.com. Wait, no, at YouTube, my channel, Writing Theory. Don't go to Writing Theory. I haven't updated writingtheory.com in a while. Okay, so when I was coming up with this idea, I was experiencing some genre burnout. And specifically, this book, Priory of the Orange Tree. This book, first off, by the way, has the greatest fantasy book cover of all time. If you think I'm lying, let me blow your mind. I wish I knew who the designer for this was, but they like nailed it. They nailed this book cover. Once you see it, you're gonna be like, oh yeah, I have seen that in like the bookstore, because it's so eye-catching. Look at this cover. Dude, are you kidding me? That is beautiful. The striking orange, the fire, the blue of this dragon, how detailed it is. This, my second ever video on this YouTube channel. My second ever video on this YouTube channel was about book covers. And I talked specifically about this one because it is clearly a no opinion needed, a fantastic book cover. A fantastic book cover. So this is a big epic fantasy. Check it out if you would like. I'm not gonna spoil anything about this book, but I mean, come on, look at how beautiful that is. That is insane. All right. One of the things about the Priory of the Orange Tree is that the dragons and a couple dragon-like creatures are able to speak. And in this story, I was like, that was one of my favorite parts. And then I looked over to my dogs and I said, what would you guys say if you were in a fantasy story? All right, Stefan, thank you for joining us for what time we could have you. I looked at my dogs and I was like, how come I don't see fantasy stories that have dogs in them? I get it. We love the elves and the orcs and the what was the turtle duck in Avatar, right? We love these things. Shout out turtle ducks. But also I love dogs. So I wonder how a dog would be portrayed in fantasy. Then it led me to the idea of like, okay, well, if we had a fantasy situation here where dogs could talk, would they be more human-like? Would they lose what makes them dogs? Are they going to become something more elevated? And I don't know if that's necessarily what I would want. And so this was the spark of me being like, you know what? Maybe there is something worth writing about just to explore this idea, because I have a hard time finding other books that would do that. Atario, hello. So this was the first idea. Now, because I had this genre burnout from epic fantasy, and I was so worn down by the world's ending, here's the big bad guy. Oh, shoot. We gotta kill the big bad guy. Oh, it hurt, but we did it. I was so burnt out on that same journey. I wanted to go the opposite way. And so I took this fantasy idea and I wrote a cozy fantasy. Now, when it comes to genre, this is a huge decision. And it's not just the idea between fantasy and cozy fantasy, but the genre that you choose is going to dictate so much about your story. Everything from the length to the content to the cover, your kind of characters, like every specific detail that you make about your book reflects the genre of the book. And it has to, because when you advertise your book as a certain genre, readers are expecting the kind of content of other books of that genre. Does that make sense? I mean, it is a very intentional thing that you have to do, right? If you advertise your book as a steampunk book, that's the genre, and you don't have steampunk in it, you're crazy. So I chose cozy fantasy, getting away from the epic fantasy genre burnout I was feeling. And so I'd read a couple books about cozy fantasy, I took what I knew about those and I helped that really determine what I was going to write about. And I made notes here. And again, this was all as I was planning and writing this. This is like real-time primary sources in this story breakdown. So I knew that when I wrote this book, I was going to be focusing on characters and relationships. Cozy fantasy really focuses on things like the day-to-day life. Not it's the end of times and we gotta save Middle Earth, but instead it's another day, and that can still have conflict. That can still have higher stakes, but it's another day. And so we still want to portray these moments of life. If you look at any cozy fantasy book, you're going to find things like conflict and tension without world-ending consequences. And of course, cozy fantasy needs to have a feel-good ending. Margaret says, I've been writing just based on what comes to mind. Would you say it's easier to adapt to fit into genre conventions early on, or can it be saved for later? I think it depends on how niche and specific your genre is, right? Cozy fantasy is a specific thing. But if you are kind of writing a book that is fantasy, that is just fantasy, as opposed to choosing a specific niche like steampunk or cozy fantasy or urban fantasy, the less niche that genre that you're choosing, I think the less specific things you need to work to include there. And so when you zoom out and you're just saying like, I'm writing a fantasy book, it's a little bit easier to make sure you're hitting those genre conventions because they're much more broad. But if you're writing a body horror book, right? A body horror, creature horror book, there are specific things you need to do. We need to have conscious decisions made about who's the monster in this creature horror book. What do they look like? Specifically, why is that, churning your guts when you're reading that section of the book? That's a genre specific thing that you need to have. But if you were to zoom out and just say, I'm writing a horror book, there's less things that are expectations for what you need to accomplish. Alba, hello. I don't know if I've seen you around before, Alba. I had an idea and then wrote almost 40,000 words. Then self-doubt began, and now I struggle to put words down. Look, it happens to us all. It happens to us all. The imposter syndrome's real. I have a video coming up soon on imposter syndrome because it is unavoidable. Even the people who are already traditionally published writers who are out there writing books that you love are going to have moments where they're like, what am I doing? I'm not, doing this to my own expectations. And it's even harder when us as emerging writers, as self-published writers, maybe if you are comparing what you're writing, especially Alba in your case, this is your first draft. If you look at other finished works and then you're like, dang, my first draft isn't as good as this new Brandon Sanderson book, you're setting yourself up for a hard time. You got to give yourself some slack. Imposter syndrome hits us all. Totally get that. And then also just life hits us all. You know what I'm saying? All right, what else we got here for genre? All right, I made a mission here, and this was something I don't think you need to do when you're writing a book. Maybe if you have a strong theme in mind, because I think we had someone ask about themes. If you have a strong theme in mind, use that, right? Instead of saying, I have a mission for my book, use your guiding theme. But for my case, I was like, the mission of my story is to explore this specific question. If dogs could talk, what would they say? And I'm going to put that in the lens of cozy fantasy. Were all these things that I'm putting down here in this story breakdown, are these all conscious decisions that I'm making as I'm planning my story? Kind of. They kind of are. I am thinking about my story in these kind of senses, I think it benefits you to consider sort of meta information, for a lack of a better word, about your story. Like things like genre decisions. Things like, what if someone were to pick up this book, what are they hoping to get out of it? Right? We've talked about this before on stream, the idea of the ideal reader that Stephen King talks about. There's someone out there who's going to pick up this book and it's going to be their favorite book of all time. What needs to be in that book to make that person lose their mind? You know what I'm saying? That kind of like meta, like I'm thinking about my story in this other way. can be incredibly valuable. So I wrote about this. This is funny. Anyone here remember Eddie Murphy as Dr. Dolittle? Shout out my Doolittle fans. What's the Doolittle fandom called? Doolittlers? Where are my Doolittlers at? That can't be right. All right. So I think naturally in my question of I think in my question of like if dogs could talk in a fantasy novel, what would they say? I like to consider other media that's doing similar things. And in this case, Dr. Dolittle already tackled this idea of dogs could talk, what would they say? Now, I didn't go out of my way to go watch this movie, but I remembered the Doodlers. I remembered as a kid watching this movie. I remembered vague recollections of how it made me feel. And I know there's someone in this chat who's going to feel the same way. If you watched this movie when you were a kid and you had a pet at home, you went home and you were willing in your head for your little hamster or turtle or dog or cat to say something to you. Because that's what that movie did, right? And so in writing this book, I wasn't saying I'm going to write a story like Dr. Dolittle, but I was saying I would love to make people feel that way too. Now, I don't think necessarily I did that here. But that was like my striving goal. If I could write this book perfectly, someone would put the book down, look at their dog, and be like, hey, what's on your mind? What's happening? And that was a good driving force to have. And that led to a lot of other questions I would discover through writing this, which are like the rules of your book. Now, I'm going to talk about my specific rules of my story, but you can adjust this to whatever book you're writing. There are some rules we need to set in the world. You know, in this book, it was, if my dogs could talk in the story, are they going to be more in this cozy fantasy book? Are they still going to be dogs as we know them? Are they still going to do dog things? Or are they going to become something bigger? Which is not really what I wanted personally. I didn't want a dog in this sort of situation to suddenly be like, to be human-like, you know? This guy says they're probably thinking about running, food, and cuddles. If you read this book, you'll find that's pretty much it. I mean, like, it was definitely when I was crafting their personalities, the more I wrote them, the more I figured out that they kind of needed to be almost like a little naive, immature, you know, like what struggles has a dog gone through and how would that influence their personality versus a person? And in this case, we're going to say people are way more complex than a dog would be. But it wasn't like, I'll show you in the writing section of this. I had to do things like, I had to ask myself, would a dog know idioms? If someone said like, let's see, what's a good idiom to use? Hold on. It comes up all the time in the dialogue of the book. So I had clearly, and basically, you know, references to things that are very human based on like our social understanding of things. Like, would a dog know something like that? These were like the rules of the world I had to create as I wrote. We'll see more of that in the writing section, but think about that for your book. Are there rules that need to be established for your world that you haven't yet considered? Because that does make a more cohesive experience. After thinking about it, I finally decided that dogs in my story are going to magically be able to talk, because, yeah, that'd be fun. But they're still going to be dogs. It would be as if my two dogs gained the ability to speak one day, and now I could ask them why they did certain things. Why are you rolling on your back like that? My God, why are you barking? Why are you eating that? Don't eat that. Why are you killing this toy? Also, though, then you had to ask the question, you know, are these dogs going to talk to each other when they're alone? Like, do they still speak to each other? Or is that just for the benefit of people? Do they, you know, disregard the dog's normal way of conversation of how they communicate with each other as dogs to now suddenly be talking? These are the kind of things you have to think about. Oh, dang, it's alive still. Oh, man. All right. So then at some point, you have to start planning your story. In this case, this was saying, I have this abstract idea. How do I make it into something I can write? Also, Lantern Valley, hello. How do I make this something that I can now write? You know what I mean? So in this case, it was, okay, you've heard me say this 1,000 times. The idea that, like, you don't sit down and plan your whole setting and then plan all your characters and then plan your plot. It all works kind of concurrently as you're putting things together. Same thing here, but I actually wrote almost like train of thoughts, which you can find this in for those who have just joined us, by the way, this whole PDF is free. It's in the Discord under the live streams channel, and you can download it and read it. And if you have the Starlight Farms Kennel for Talking Dogs book, I think it becomes a really helpful tool in understanding stories. So even if you don't have it, you can still go download that and just see, like right now we're talking about thought processes, but we're about to get over to writing and editing and publishing and all the decisions that have to be made in there. And I think that's really cool. So check that out. Link to the Discord below if you're not already part of it. So I'm going to skip all this part. I'm not just going to read this to you guys, but this is like just a full train of thought about all the decisions I was settling on and deciding on about characters, right? So again, talking about in regards to the dogs here, this was probably the most important decision to make, because how you portray the dogs in this case is like the whole point of the book. Day Swallow says, Indie boys are so neurotic. Oh, bacon. Oh, shout out Mr. Biscuit. So there's a book I read a while ago, long time ago, maybe back in high school, called The Art of Driving in the Rain, not Racing in the Rain. I always get that wrong. But that's told from the perspective of a dog. But, and I swear this is done pretty often for dog perspectives, the owners always leave the TV on for the dog. So he's filled with pop culture references. And he makes jokes about Friends and Seinfeld. And I mean, I feel like you lose the dog aspect of this. And now you're just writing a normal character who happens to be a dog. And that, you know what I'm saying? Just guy says, free is the only thing my broke bum can afford. Shout out. Shout out free things. Okay, so again, I'm not going to read all these to you, but all these decisions I was making based on the character, based on the plot. And here's the thing. I'm a huge proponent of the brain dump. And so this whole thing, I took my entire brain dump and I put it in the story breakdown. Meaning you can see the very first iteration of the story compared to the final version. And you'll see in this brain dump, if you have read the book, we're missing like an incredibly important character to the story is not even present in this version of the story and won't be present for a while. So I'll read this. The brain dump is a huge thing I recommend everyone do at the early part of your planning stage, which is you take and internalize every kind of like decision that you made so far, your understanding of the story, and then you just put it all out there. Summarize your story start to finish. And what you'll find is in just naturally putting these words down, you're going to start to fill in little holes of your story that you haven't been consciously thinking about. Or you're going to come up with the whole ending of your book without even sitting there and pondering it. It's just going to come out. And that's exactly what happened here. So this entire first section of this brain dump was kind of what I already like knew about. Walter, praise the proto draft. Let's go. This is what I knew about my story. And the second half that I'm going to read through here completely just came out with the brain dump, which is why I think this is so important. So Rachel and Marcus, my two main characters, run the Starlight Farm. It's a farm on the outskirts of Luminara Keep, a city that surrounds a royal keep. Rachel has taken in dogs that people no longer want because they have gained the magical ability to talk. As she gains more dogs, she and Marcus decide to build a kennel for the dogs while they try to find them homes. Over the next few months, the fairy apple orchard that the Starlight Farm maintains doesn't do so well and money becomes tight. Rachel and Marcus have to bring in more money to keep the farm alive. That was like my inciting incident, my planning of just like, here's kind of the setup for the book. I hadn't planned anything else after this, so I just kept going with the brain dump just to see, hey, what's going to come out. The Night Moon Festival is coming up in Luminara Keep. Starlight Farm, Night Moon, Luminara. I'm choosing like a naming convention. I feel like that does a really good job in helping build atmosphere, and I got that from a series of unfortunate events. Lemony Snicket, greatest example of atmosphere in a book. Just saying. You know, you can learn from the greats. Also, don't look up Lemony Snicket now. He's done some weird things. Anyways. The Night Moon Festival is coming up in Luminara Keep, and word's gotten out about the talking dogs that Rachel takes in. The festival runner, Dartman Velish, sees the talking dogs as an opportunity to drive more families to the Night Moon Festival. He offers to pay Marcus and Rachel and Marcus to bring the dogs to the festival. First, they're hesitant, but they need the money. They train the dogs to be nice and do these tricks. At the festival, the dogs are a big hit, and there are a lot of families interested in adopting the dogs. But Dartman doesn't want the dogs adopted, though. He wants the dogs to be at the festival every year, so he tries to sabotage the dogs getting adopted. Everything seems lost the next day when Dartman doesn't pay Marcus and Rachel for their festival appearance. However, word's gotten out about the dogs, and donations start coming to help the farm operate. Barky gets adopted by a serious family who has a dozen children and a farm full of ducks. Goose gets adopted by a seamstress in Luminara Keep, and she fixes his favorite bear, and he becomes a loving part of their family. That has similarities with the final product. Similarities. There is so much in here in the final version that is not present here. For example, an entire main character named Baguette, who plays an incredibly important role in the story, at this point wasn't even there. We'll talk about why in a bit. Margaret says, note to self, research genre conventions. Yes. How do you research genre conventions? Probably a great follow-up question. Number one thing to do is read books in that genre or watch movies in that genre. Number one thing to do, but watch it with intentionality of being like, what's present in this movie that makes it feel like this kind of story? Margaret says, also my proto draft is basically just an oversized brain dump. Hey, that's the proto draft for you. That's not a bad thing. Just guy says, shout out baguettes. We love baguettes here. Big baguette fan. And fail as fast as possible. So Walter, that's a good point. Failing quickly. For those who don't know, this is a term that comes up a lot in things like software development or product development, which is if you're going to try something out, try it out in a way that if you know it's not working, you can go ahead and be like, all right, it's not working. Let's move on to the next thing. Probably a good, that would be a good video to do one day on how to do that with a book. I know a lot of authors will write short stories of their characters in their books before actually writing the long version, just to sort of test the waters, the world, the atmosphere, and all these things like that. I'm currently trying that out with a book that I have always wanted to write. I've been kind of passively planning, and I decided one of the good things to do to figure out who should like my perspective characters be is to write a little excerpt from these 5 possible characters I really liked and see which ones felt most compelling and natural and unique and interesting before settling on those to further develop the story. And you know what? If one of those characters doesn't work, fail fast and move on to the next one. So that's an interesting idea, Walter. All right, brain dump here. A lot of new details came up here. Big fan of the brain dump. Highly recommend you check it out. Try it out if you haven't already. Margaret says, I've never done that purposefully, talking about the failing fast, but I've come to realize a lot of scrap projects were like test runs of a main character of mine. That sounds like it. Yeah. I know there are a ton of authors that before they start working on a really long book will do a short story along the same themes, right? Maybe it has characters, maybe it's a different set of characters, maybe it's a different set of time, but it's kind of just like feeling the world out. Rob J. Hayes, who wrote the book Herald that I read this past, he was in one of my videos earlier this year, did a couple different short stories for this world he was building just to kind of like feel things out. And I think that's a really smart idea. And tabletop RPGs are the storyteller's best friend. All right, what did I do next? After I have the brain dump, after I've tweaked things, then it's all about the putting this into a plot framework. My entire plot framework, now extrapolated a little bit better, is in the story breakdown. And a lot of this gets us a lot closer to the final version. This uses Dan Harmon's storytelling circle, I believe is what it's called, which was the reason why I chose this. Hold on, I think I actually wrote that up here. Dan Harmon's story circle framework. The reason why I chose this one is it was very clearly a journey where you go through trials and tribulations, you learn a lesson, and you come back home. And I thought that was necessary for the themes of my story, which is like building a home, building a family, found family. And so you can always come back and see, you know, how things have changed. There are other frameworks that do that. The hero's journey is another circular kind of plot framework. I went with Dan Harmon's. And so this was me putting all the details into that framework. So you can find that in the story breakdown. And finally, after doing all that, also, by the way, the story breakdown has actionable takeaways at the end of every chapter. So if you didn't want to, you don't even have to read all that other stuff. You can just be like, okay, I'm just going to look at the end of this chapter and see what's what. After I had that plot framework, then it's time to write. Here's the deal. I'm not going to read everything out of this. In fact, I think I'm about done with looking at this story breakdown. I think you get the gist, the idea that like, hey, this is all about the decisions that I had to make in writing this. Mostly because I want to open up Scrivener and show you my files and everything like that. I think that'd be more useful. If you have read Starlight Farm's Kennel for Talking Dogs already, I think this is a really useful thing. If you're not interested in picking this up, I still think it's interesting just to see a really in-depth look at someone's writing process. So if you've ever had questions on like, how do I write a book? This is like super detailed. And also it's only 50 pages. So you're not buying a 300-page book on Save the Cats. And half the book is like, here's how you can use it in a romance framework. And then also, here's how you can use it in a mystery framework. And also, and then 150 pages is that, I don't know. I think sometimes there's something to be said for brevity. You can find that in the Discord link below. It's in the live stream channel. All right. Hope you guys like it. After we have this part of the PDF, let's talk. Just guy, if you tell me something about barking, I'm gonna have to ask you to leave. Anyone? Hello? Look, when we get to the root of the problem in this chat is that my comedy isn't appreciated. My comedy isn't appreciated. Other streamers with comedy like this, with zingers like this, they got 200, 400, 1,000 viewers at any given moment because people know gold when they see it. And we're there. We're on the way up. All right. So let's talk about Scrivener files. All right. So here's the deal. I have my Scrivener file opened up here. And I'm going to talk about a few things. If you haven't seen Scrivener before. This is Scrivener. This is like the de facto writing tool, in my personal opinion. And when it comes to planning out a story, what you're looking at is basically like a really glorified but optimized like file structure. Just Guy says they have plenty of bark. Worth it. Thank you, Just Guy. That's A+ quality content. It is, though. It is. When you use Scrivener, you can kind of tweak this however you want. I use a pretty basic setup. I kept track, if you look over here on the left side, let's see if I wonder if I can make this any bigger or anything. I keep track of all my characters, and I am actually not a huge planner, personally. I don't do a ton of planning. So, like, the character stuff that I knew going into writing my proto draft was less than this, because this is even after I've added some detail in how I keep track of my characters. So here's the deal. I like to cast my characters. It may be AI, it may be actors or actresses that I kind of have in mind for who would fit this character. If I was making a movie about this, this is who I would want to play this character. In this book, there's very little physical description of our main characters. And this is maybe one of the hottest takes that I have. Is like, doesn't matter so much. Doesn't matter if you know the height of our main characters or their eye colors or their hair colors. Like, does it really matter that much? So sometimes this is really just for me. And if anyone recognizes who this is, this actress plays Janet in The Good Place, which is a great, fun TV show. But what I want to focus here is that, Margot can draw them. So I wish I had that ability. I only have like 8 sentences of character description. And honestly, this description kind of, changes the more I understand this character. Alba says, I write contemporary romance in English set in Sweden. I write 90% direct dialogue with actions, emotions, and reflections, but is it too much? Should it be paragraphs of monologue? Alba, what do you think the genre conventions would say? Also, the more general audience kind of book you're writing, you're kind of following a more specific set of standards. The good thing is there's so much content in romance books that you have a lot of rules to follow. Let me rephrase that. You have a lot of source material to study. I think also your question of direct dialogue, actions, emotions, and reflections, should it be paragraphs and monologue, is going to change based on what's happening in the scene. You're going to have action forward scenes, and you're going to have dialogue forward scenes. I'm personally a huge fan of both reading and writing dialogue forward scenes. So it's not out of place, but it's something you should consciously make decisions about based on what you're writing at the time. That's probably a good way to say it. There are scenes that deserve to be action forward, and there are scenes that deserve to be dialogue forward or narration forward. It's a matter of understanding the strengths of each one of those so you can make an informed decision. Atariel says, in romance book, it certainly matters. Fair, as well as their smell. That's what I've heard. Katie says, I've read a few things about how we envision a thing from our experience when we read. For example, my barn will look different from yours because of our different memories. That's very true. And in that way, you could almost argue that everyone who reads a book that you write is creating their own version of it that's not reflective of maybe your author vision, but just has those major decisions and elements and moments of your book. But now, is it their book? Is it their story? Are they experiencing it in a different way? I think that's an interesting idea. What do you guys think? The author provides an outline and the reader colors it in. That's kind of pretty. I think there's a value in letting your reader kind of fill in those details. But like we said, like Eterial said, that may be a genre convention. Since it's all our own versions, might as well never describe the POV characters. It's only logical. We're only partway where this is a 90% of a joke, but 10% of it's like, you know, doesn't matter if I know what Ender Wiggin looks like in Ender's game. I don't know. Maybe there's some plot points based around it. Then we should know. But anyways, I'm just kind of being argumentative. But you'll notice when I'm doing my planning, I keep things pretty simple. I don't do big character sheets personally. I tend to find that as I'm writing the story, I'll have an initial vision. Of course, you hear me say it all the time, that vision's gonna change. But the big thing is that, by the way, this is Nick Offerman, shout out. The big thing is that I find that the characters I am writing tend to evolve to fill specific roles in the story. Roles in the story. So like, you know, for example, I ended up making an entirely new character that wasn't part of any planning of mine, because I noticed right away as I was in the midst of writing the story, I had 2 dogs in my story that had very different personalities. One of them was very like social and intrigued and like kind of happy-go-lucky, and one was a little bit more gloomy and a little bit more pessimistic. And the dichotomy of those 2 things, they weren't really working so well. And it took the inclusion of a 3rd character in this story. This is Baguettes. That would become really close friends with our golden retriever, the happy-go-lucky character. That would now make the dichotomy between the 2, the happy-go-lucky and the gloomy dog, much more apparent, and started to paint this gloomy side of this other dog as almost an intentional decision. They choose to be the outsider. And when you only have 2 characters, it's really hard to say one of them is choosing to be an outsider. You know what I mean? Because you don't really have an option when there's only 2. There's no way people can band together and leave someone on the outside when you just had 2. So I ended up adding a whole other character to the story, specifically because I was noting that this dichotomy wasn't working so well. And that's one of the things I talk about in the story breakdown. When it comes to writing the story, pretty straightforward, just using this as a standard text editor. Opening up Scrivener, I organized this in my 4 acts, and then I just kind of put in some chapters. I wasn't worried about anything like chapter length. I wasn't worried about anything like, you know, I was just out here writing. We'll talk about that in a second. Alba says, I study books similar to my style. There you go. Well, I would say, because your previous question was about dialogue versus action tags versus monologues, look at what those other authors are doing. Because if you look up to them, then there's a writing style that you want to emulate, and that's a powerful force. Euphemia, also, hello, I don't know if I've seen you around yet. Euphemia says it's more important for non-human characters, alien species, dragons, sentient toys. It matters less for run-of-the-mill humans, except in where some of their features might be pertinent. I think that's the biggest thing. I think when you're describing non-human characters, and this is going to be, of course, more of like a science fiction, fantasy, or horror sort of discussion, or genre expectation, the description of the character isn't so much character work, but now it's part of the world building. And now it's like, you know, twofold. If you go through and you describe this character, it's not only painting a picture of who this character is, but now you're painting a picture of like an entire culture or an entire species, and then how they act, how they impact the world. And that's one of the really fun parts of writing in these genres for sure. So that's a good point, Euphemia. Let me know if I'm pronouncing that right. The writing process was pretty straightforward. Lots of chapters here. You can see Act 2 gets a lot longer. Act 3 over here. If you use Scrivener, I just use it like a file system. There's some crazy things you can do in here. For example, you know, maybe you want to be able to move around scenes and reorganize them in different ways. And maybe that helps you be able to plan things out. Now, this is purely visual, but you could reorganize them over here in the file structure as well. You can also do different timelines. Let's say you have a section of your book that has characters at different perspectives going through different steps, yada, yada, yada. You want to keep track of each individual perspective story. Now you can move these around to your heart's content. Some of the cool things here. Ooh, card size, neat. Ooh, ratio 6:4. This is kind of cool. I don't use this so much, but I think I might end up using it soon. But we'll see. We'll see. Vertical time. So, by the way, yeah, if you haven't ever tried this before, it's pretty freaking cool. Let me make my card size big. All right. So, pretty straightforward text editor. Went through, wrote this whole thing. Learned a lot. Let's talk about maybe the biggest thing I encountered when I was doing this writing was the fact that as I got closer and closer to the climax of the story, he says they need to make a how-to Scrivener video with all the fun things. It's really hard. There's not a lot of fantastic, at least that I found, not a lot of fantastic Scrivener tutorial kind of content that feels fun to watch. I don't know the best way to say it there. Maybe that's, maybe I should be the change I want to see in the world. We'll see. There are a lot of features. The question is, like, how many of them do you really need? You could write a whole book without using a lot of the features, just file system and writing, and you're 95% of the way there. Either way, in my writing process, one of the biggest things that I ended up really discovering, and this was, I think, a really good skill to develop, is starting to write something like the big climactic ending here. Writing the big climactic ending here, and then being like, there are moments in this big climactic ending that I'm going to purposefully write because I think it's going to be really good and really exciting, but they may not yet make sense. But I'm going to make notes of writing this thing to tell myself as I'm editing to go back and set this up in a satisfying way. There were, here's a very specific moment. In this climactic scene, what we have is a child who's been chased away down these alleys from this animal in Luminara Keep. And that child's in danger. And so Rachel, our main character, sends the dogs out to go save this child. They're the only one who can sniff out, where this child went in this maze of alleyways. So first off, I made sure to go back and say, I have these dogs here. Barky has one of the characters. Barky has a very specific purpose in this story. Goose has a very specific purpose in this story. But our dachshund here, this new character that I added, because it wasn't as planned from the get-go, Baguette didn't have as much of a purpose in the story yet. So I was like, you know what? If we give Baguette give the Baguette the value of being able to have a more sensitive tracking than these other two dogs, Baguette earns her place in the story here, right? But I can also take this one quality of this, set it up earlier on, and even make it part of their final resolution of the story. And that's exactly what I did. As I got to this climactic scene, I was like, Baguette doesn't really have a place in the story yet. I'm going to give her this specific purpose. She's there to track down where these creatures chase this girl down this alley. That's her purpose. Now I'm going to go back earlier in the story and set this up and emphasize it and make it a core part of her journey. And that is one thing that I only discovered by writing this. But developing the skill of being in your proto draft, kind of understanding naturally how this story should evolve next, and being able to note I can make this more satisfying by building another moment earlier, made, I think, my final story way better. That was big for me. I hope I phrased that right. Mr. Slothman says, how did you get through the middle section of your book? That is always the hardest for me. That is the hardest part of the book to write, hands down. 100%. Anyone who says differently, I have to disagree with. It is easy to think of how you want your story to open. The cool inciting incident is going to kick everything off. I think it's kind of easy to say, here's how the story should end. But to build up to all of these moments, to develop the character interactions, to develop the world, to move the plot where it needs to be, all between those two moments is the hardest thing. It's called the middle 50% of your novel, because so many plot frameworks say 25% of your book is the opening, 25% of your book is the closing, and 50% is your act 2 in the middle. That's the traditional 3-act structure. Now, you can choose to subvert that. We're not talking about that yet. But how do you get through the middle section of your book? The biggest piece of advice, and the thing that helped me out the most, was not to look at Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. I need to write all of Act 1. Then I'm going to write 50% of my whole novel, Act 2. Then I'm going to end it in Act 3. It was to say, here's Act 2. I'm going to use a fancy little maneuver, this pro gamer move called story recursiveness. Shout out Sean Coyne, The Story Grid, which I got a lot of value of reading that book. You can check out my breakdown of that on my channel, my writing book breakdown. Story recursiveness is that you can take, let's say, a 3-act story, and you can zoom into each one of these acts and kind of break that act down into its own 3-act story. Where do we start? What happens in the middle? What's the ending? And if you zoom in even further, you can continue to sort of break down, and they use the idea of like acts to sequences to scenes, that every part of the story is an inciting incident, a crisis, or like a rising action, a climax, and a resolution. And like everything that you look at contains these parts. So here's what really helped me. To look at my middle 50% of the story, I know where the story is going to end up. Right? Let's say we just got through our inciting incident. We just hit what a 3-act story structure would call Act 2. How do I get from here to the climax? Maybe that's location-wise. How are we traveling there? Maybe that's, if it's a quest, right? What elements do I need to go gain or gather, or you know, what do I need to do to progress the plot and the characters to that climax? And here's what I did. Take that part, the entire Act 2, from inciting incident to the climax, and break it into 3 major sections, right? 3-act story. 3 major sections. What are the 3 things you need to do to move towards that climax? Because it is a lot easier to write these 3 smaller journeys than it is to just say, here's 50% of my novel. I'm now going to write 50% of my novel. Instead, use this as like checkpoints, right? We got through the inciting incident. Let's say we're Lord of the Rings, right? Frodo has the ring. He just ran away from the Shire. How are we going to get to determining the Fellowship of the Ring? How are we going to get to Boromir getting shot with the arrow? That big climactic ending. Well, step 1, we need to get to the Prancing Pony and meet Aragorn. Step 2, we need to get to Rivendell and establish the Fellowship of the Ring. Step 3, we need to get through the Mines of Moria. After that, now we have our big climactic ending with Boromir. Shout out Lord of the Ring fans. Slamming that reaction button. I found that breaking this middle 50% of my novel into these smaller chunks, way easier to process, way easier to handle. And on top of that, you're determining what these 3 points are. If you can't identify 3 major moments to help you get through to the climax, then you have more planning that needs to be done. Does that mean you have to have 3 moments? No, you could have more. You could have less. But the core principle here is that we need to be doing something in that middle 50. You break it into 3 steps. And especially if you say each one of these little checkpoints is going to be a little bit more dangerous, a little bit more exciting, a little bit more on the line. Here's a little twist in this one. Now you have a story that progressively gets more and more interesting. So Mr. Slothman, I hope that's at least a good starting point. That's how I do it now. I say, here's these 3 points. How do I get to the next point, and how do I make that exciting? And then after that, how do I get to the next point? Joe G89, hello. I don't know if I've seen you in chat before. Random storytelling question. Can you use the weather of your story to relate a character's emotion or a story's theme? English teachers will tell you yes. English teachers will say, in this scene, it's raining outside. What's the joke that we always say? In this scene, it's raining outside, so that symbolizes our main character's depression and the issues that they're currently facing internally. In reality is, hey, if you're writing a story and your main character is really, let's use the idea of rain outside, is really struggling internally with despair, you probably wouldn't write in your story about the birds chirping outside and the nice sunny day. You could, maybe you're trying to juxtapose these things, but in the reality is, if I was to write a scene like that, I would want everything to build on the point of what I'm writing, and at this point in time, the point is our main character's kind of emotional state. That makes sense? Some characters can like the rain. I agree. I don't mean to say that no one likes the rain, but I'm saying that, readers will naturally take the idea of a brooding storm outside to mean tension on the horizon. You know what I'm saying? Or the clap of thunder and lightning outside to mean anger or chaos. So it can strengthen things. That's what I would say, Joe. And extrapolate that beyond weather into every other aspect of your story. Especially if you're doing something like a first-person story, if your main character is going through some inner turmoil in any kind of way, they're going to see the world differently based on that emotional state. If everything's doom and gloom, you're going to notice more of the doom and gloom around you. If you're having a great day, you're going to notice the great things. I think that's kind of a human thing. Just guy says, make the POV character create the atmosphere rather than the environment to set the scene. That's a good point too, right? And that's why I think this is you would consider this atmosphere in the story is meant to strengthen what the reader's experiencing, not to be the sole driver. Euphemia says, rain is my jam. Jam is my rain. It's raining jam. No, that was weird. All right. So let's say you're using Scrivener, you get through your proto draft, you're like, okay, there's a ton of stuff I need to do to fix this. I just duplicated everything and I put it down here as my second draft. And you'll notice there's a ton of red in here. With Scrivener, you go up here into formats, revision mode. You can set either your first revision, second revision, third revision, fourth, fifth, etc. And now any changes that you make, you can very easily see what you've updated, what you've changed. And you'll find just about everything in here is touched up on here. So I also think this is really interesting here. If you have never gotten past your proto draft, your first draft. If you don't know what a proto draft is, check out my channel. It's one of my favorite videos and one of my most important ones, in my opinion. If you've ever wondered, okay, I've written my proto draft, I'm going to my first draft now. What all is going to change? Who else uses red to make corrections on the draft? It's just natural. It's just natural. How do you know what to edit in your story? Let me tell you. Right back here, what I did was I finished my proto draft. Let's switch over here to this other view. Of course, Joe, of course. After I finished my proto draft, which was just my first attempt at getting everything down on the page, knowing I'm going to be making changes, how do you know what to edit? Big question here. right? How do you go from this rough state into something that's more of a reflection of what you have in your head? Because that's what we want to do as writers. We want to take all of that awesome detail in our brain, how we understand the characters, how cool this plot is, how awesome this world is, and we want to put it down in words so that someone else can pick it up and experience it in the same way. What I did was I printed out my proto draft. First off, so cool to hold your first, like to hold a story in your hands that you wrote. We'll get to the whole book thing in a second. But I printed out my proto draft, and in this case, I can actually see up here, it was 40,100 words. The final story would be 53,000, but at this point, it was 40,000. And here's what I did. The very first page, I know you can't read it, but I just want to showcase you. I took a note card, and I taped it on here. Printed out your proto draft and got it spiral bound. Look, if there's one time to be extra in your life, it's when you're proud of finishing a story. You know what I mean? Yeah, that's right. I went to UPS. I had it printed out. I paid $14 to have it bound. I don't even know if that's what the price was, but it felt really cool to hold it afterwards. Here's what I did. I took a big note card and I just taped it on here. And I said, I'm going to put overarching story changes that I want to make on this note card. But I'm also going to put a note card on every single chapter, and any bit of change that I wanted to make about that specific chapter, I wrote it here. Meaning, if ever I was reading like halfway through this whole proto draft, and then I was like, you know what? Something's not working. I'd flip over to the front and I'd be like, here's a big change I need to make. Right? But like, here's just one random one. I said, the point of this chapter is to set up some kind of trick that will feel pointless, but give the dogs but save the dogs or people in the climax of the story. I don't know if this current trick being done is the right move, so maybe change it? I don't know. It's so funny to actually put this up. This is like a prime example of foreshadowing and everything. I initially wrote a scene in this book that was just meant to be a fun scene. You know what? The dogs are about to go at this festival, and like that's going to be a major point in the story. At this point, our characters think we have to have the dogs do all kinds of tricks and entertain these people before they're like, you know what? The dogs can talk. Why are we bothering with dumb little acrobatic tricks? Potato. Am I right, guys? So this was kind of a throwaway scene. Later on in the story, I found a place where this could be useful. And so I totally changed the scene and made it way better and gave it purpose that would come back in the climax. And that was the kind of thing I noticed in editing, you know? Do you fix typos when you're editing your proto draft? God, no. Don't do it. It's not worth it. There's no point. You're going to rewrite so much. I mean, look at what we have over here just from going from, the proto draft to the first draft. If I open up any of these. Lots of red, lots of red. See if we can get another good one. Oh, by the way, then I took all the notes I had for each chapter. Oh, I'm not even showing you my screen. I took all the notes that I had in each chapter that I had made in my proto draft, and I brought it into Scrivener just to have it all here, as opposed to be constantly referencing something. All I'm editing in this stage, going from proto draft to first draft, are story structure things. Things that are going to make the story feel better at the end of it. Things that are going to make it seem like it's more well thought out. And then by the end of the first draft, after I've added all those scenes, after I've added all those bits, after I've built the setup so that the payoff feels better, then I can do more editing. But at that point, I at least have a story that I'm ready to share with someone and get their thoughts on it. And so that brings us to another little thing I kept over here. called beta reading notes. Here's what I did. Let's talk about beta reading. This is something that I didn't do enough, but I'm glad I did what I did. Joe says, what are your thoughts about intentional typos for artistic purposes? I can spell, I swear. You have to really do it well. And here's the thing. You can always append, unless you do it well, to any writing advice that you get. If someone's like, never have a typo, unless you do it well. Or like, never start your story off with, it was a dark and stormy night, unless you do it well. Because you can break rules. This is a creative, artistic kind of thing. And there's very little rules. But you have to make sure you're doing it successfully. Like, here's an example. This guy says in dialogue, maybe. Stephen King has his book, The Stand. And he has a character there who has some sort of mental deficiency. And that comes through in his dialogue in very specific ways. And spelling out words differently than how they're, I guess I should say incorrectly, is there to help give that character a unique voice. Here's the deal. We're not all Stephen King. I tell a lot of people, don't phonetically type out the accents of your characters in your dialogue. And that's kind of in the same vein here, right? Spelling things differently intentionally because you want it to be pronounced this other way. I say generally don't do that. It makes for a worse reading experience. So if you do want to do it, it needs to be very purposeful for a good reason. And that's probably the best way to say it. Euphemia says you can selectively lampshade it. So when it reoccurs, your reader will say, oh yeah, that's intentional. Another good point, don't do it just one time. That's a good point. Make it a pointed thing. All right, let's talk about beta reading. At some point, I highly recommend, and I wish I had done this better. I highly recommend that you share your story with someone in efforts to get their thoughts on how it can be improved. Now, this is a huge conversation to be had about beta reading, right? For those who don't know, beta reading you can pay someone to do. If you have a friend or you're part of some awesome Discord community based around like the community of like a writing YouTube channel, link below, maybe you can find someone who is open to beta reading. The purpose of beta reading is for you to give your story to someone. You are not going to add any more information. You're not going to tell them things like, oh, by the way, I meant to do this, or I meant to do that, or, you know, I know this is. Anyway, I'll just get across to what I need to say here. In the perfect world, you can get 5 beta readers. This is someone to read your book and give you notes about here's the things I liked, or I was left confused by, or I couldn't understand the purpose of. And you can give direction to them. And then it's up to you to then go through and say, I'm going to take that advice and change my story, or I'm not. So I gave this book to my wife, and this is actually in the story breakdown in the Discord, where I have all the things that they said, and then me going through and being like, how would I fix this? See, where did I can't remember. I have 2 of these. Maybe it's just in my story breakdown. I can't remember. But then I used the beta reading notes, and I said, okay, based on the feedback that I got, here are the things I agree with. Here's the things that I don't. You don't have to agree with everything your beta readers say. That being said, if you have 5 beta readers and all 5 of them say, I don't get this thing, you should probably listen to them. You may be asking yourself, why 5 beta readers? Why not 25? Why not just 1? In user testing, I come from a background working in software. In user testing, you get something like 85% of your necessary feedback on, in this case, a product from just 5 users. Why would that be the case? Well, that's because when you have one person give you feedback, every piece of information that they give you is new. It's the first time you've seen it. You now are aware of it. But that probably doesn't cover every single aspect of your product, just the way that they would use that product. So you get another user. They use this tool in a slightly different way. They give you feedback and responses about that product. But the thing is, a lot of it is still going to be shared with that first user, repeating the same points. This UI is bad, or like, I don't like these colors, or I find this thing confusing. But they still bring up new information. After 5 total users, you get very negligible returns. And you can look up user experience testing, how many users should you use for that. The same information brings over to beta reading. If I had 5 people read through this story and give me their feedback, that would cover the majority of people who are ever going to read this book and how they would perceive it in that state and how I can fix it and fine tune it up. The more beta reading that you get from that point on, you're getting less return. Is it still good to have? Sure. But as a rule of thumb, 5, kind of like optimal, maybe the right word. I just had my wife, and so she brought up a lot of good points, and I said, okay, here's the scenes I need to add to answer all these different things. And I kept track of that here. Here's a scene I specifically wanted to add in because it was going to emphasize something later on based on my beta reading notes. Story breakdown has all of that in it. This is what made it into draft number 2. And then, something terrible happened. I'm going to be real with everyone. This is a big moment. I'm going to be real with you. I started to doubt myself because it happens to all of us. I was reading through my proto draft and my first draft that I did, the second draft. Basically, I had added all these things in, and I started to doubt myself. Like I said, happens to all of us. Specifically, I started to doubt whether my writing style fit this book well. What do I mean by that? I have a background of technical writing, which is very direct. It is very much, here is what happens. And I, at the time, started to wonder whether or not that was befitting for a book in cozy fantasy. And whether or not my story was now going to be a failure because of that. So what did I do? Oh, what did I do? I did something bad. And it's something I wouldn't wish on anyone. I took my entire 50,000 word story and I wrote it all from scratch again. Specifically with the purpose of adding more of a fantastical feel. And I think that was a mistake. I think I was in my own head. But then once I was 30,000 words into completely rewriting this whole thing, how do you stop? How do you say, okay, now I can just stop and, now is there going to be a division between what I had rewritten and what I hadn't? And here's the deal. The thing is, maybe there were some improvements. Maybe there weren't. The biggest effect of the entire thing was in my own head. Because when I wrote that proto draft, I was in the reverie of writing a story, discovering the story, of understanding these characters and building these awesome moments. And I was in the climax of the story with them, my heart beating, tears welling in my eyes as I was doing these things to these characters to put them through turmoil. I was in there. I was feeling it when I wrote that proto draft. That wasn't there. That spark of inspiration wasn't there when I rewrote the entire thing. at that point, it felt more like I was transcribing something, like I was just there to type. And that's not good. Now, I do think personally I have the ability to type well, to tell a good turn of phrase. And so I stuck it out. I did my best to reimagine these scenes. What I would do, here, I'll even show you right here. The exact way that I would do this, I pulled up a whole new manuscript. In fact, this little section over here where it says second draft checkpoint is there specifically because of this rewrite. I took everything that I had in my manuscript and I put it down here as a checkpoint. And I added a whole brand new one. And what I would do is I would use Scrivener up here to create two editors. So I have something on the right side and something on the left side. I could click over here and choose a different folder to view. And I would have my scene on the left, my old work from my proto draft after I've done, what edits I needed to do. And then I have a new file on the right. And I wouldn't type word for word, of course, because I'm here to rewrite things. But what I would do is I would use this file on the right, the story I had already written, as a prompt to reimagine this scene like that, but now really focus on the prose, really focus on the description, really focus more on things that were more about creating a better reading experience than maybe what I had done before. But here's the thing. I think I was just in my head. I don't think, looking back at it now, this original draft that I was at before the rewrite was that much different. I don't think the reader at the end of this all would have known or cared. But it took 17 writing sessions, so probably about a month, if I had to guess. 17 times sitting down to write to redo this whole thing. In fact, I can open up my project, writing history, and then I can tell you the last day of my proto draft was this day I got 7,000 words down. Felt great. Then I took a little time off and I did like a second edit. And then probably right around here is when I did my big rewrite. And you'll see from June 10th all the way to July 12th. So a full month of rewriting. 2,000 words, 4,400 words, 3,700 words, 3,300 words, 1,200, 300, 5,800, 1,800, 1,400. I was putting in the time. I was putting in the work, and it did go faster because I wasn't creating every moment from scratch. I was simply trying to be more vivid in my retelling of that story in my head. And I'm really torn about it now because I don't want to say that it made for a better story, but maybe it did. I haven't read this proto draft in a long time. Maybe, the story felt better because I had more focus on the prose, but I probably wouldn't do it again. I would take more time on the proto draft to make my prose nicer instead of just trying to blow through it as fast as I could. And I would be more intentional in my editing and really read my draft to mark the moments I could expand on the atmosphere and the vibes and the detail of the world, as opposed to just saying, I'm going to rewrite everything. I think that was a mistake, and it haunted me. So that is one of the big things from the story breakdown. There's a whole section in that PDF all about this, about why I now think it was not the right move, but what I was thinking when I made that decision. If you think that, and I've seen someone ask it in the Discord before. They said, should I rewrite? It may have been Margot. I don't know if Margot's still here. I'm not 100% sure. But someone had asked, should I retype this out? And I was immediately like, I don't know. I don't think that you're going to see the market improvement that you would want to see for fully redrafting it. Katie says, a little more measured with the decision-making process, I suppose. I think in this next book with Upon Careless Gray Hills, when I'm editing that, I will likely, first off, I know for a fact that my prose in this next book has improved. One, because I was writing it on stream, I knew you could all see it. So I was like, damn, I gotta lock it down a little bit. Then let's see what else. Yeah, I think now instead what I would do, if I could go back in time, I would go to, as I'm editing my story, I would look specifically for places to improve. Because if I'm noticing that I could do better writing this section, then I would imagine maybe the reader does. But if I'm reading through other sections and I'm not feeling that way, then I know the reader's not going to be feeling that way. I'm way more critical of my work. You know what I'm saying? So that's my feeling now. What's done can't be undone. I'm still proud of the final result, and I do feel like there are moments where I felt like I did a good job with the detail and the prose and everything. I don't think that's my strength as an author. I think character interactions are more my strength in dialogue. But you know what? Putting a little bit more focus there, I learned a lot about my writing style. Joe says, whenever I see red fonts or red ink, they make me think about the teachers from middle school, and I curl to a fetal position and weep. Same. Here's the deal. What I've also learned, I appreciate the little reactions. What I've also learned when you're editing, and I said this in one of my videos, I think about motivation in writing. The next time that I editing really got me down. Because I was only looking at the things I did wrong. I was only circling things being like, this was not done right, or this could be better, or like, this sucks. And so I started being like, do I suck? Maybe it's not the book that sucks. Maybe it's me. So now, next time I edit, I'm going to have another pen where I specifically highlight all the things I really love that I wrote. This character interaction was very wholesome. This was a lot of fun to read. This had a lot of tension. This had a lot of drama. This had a lot of conflict. Good job, Carson. Because when you just see red ink and you know it's just the things that you want to improve, what you end up doing is you flip through that proto draft and you're like, damn, I did a lot of bad stuff. Jessica says, can you tell who's spamming those reactions? I see everything, but also no. All right. Let's see what else we got here. Let's look back here. We went through organization, clutch Scrivener features. Here's something I would highly recommend if you're using Scrivener, and you know I'm a big fan of it. I found a lot of good use when I was drafting. To go over here, let's actually go to this little second draft checkpoint because I'll have some here. Okay. Over here on the right side, anytime you have, like, here I am, like, typing all my stuff for this chapter. Over on the right side, you have a synopsis and you have a notes. The synopsis and a notes, when you are exporting your proto draft after you've finished it, you can choose to put in your synopsis and notes underneath every single chapter. When you export it out. So if you already know that there are some things you want to touch on or fix or set up or pay off or whatever the case may be, you can make your life a lot easier by jotting those things down in the notes section here. And then when you export your story out to PDF to send off to the printer like I did, it'll be at the top of every single chapter that you have, giving you that information so that you are already know, you're like a step ahead of editing. I used this a lot. What do we got over here? Margo says, my fear is that my draft isn't good enough and my edits can't fix it, but I'm getting the sense self-publishing doesn't care if it sucks as long as it's legible. I think I'd want you, Margo, to look at it in a little bit more of an optimistic way. Whew, close one. Self-editing is not held to the same standards as traditional publishing or self-publishing. It's not held to the same standards as traditional publishing because everyone knows when they pick up a self-published indie book that there is not a team of the best editors in the world looking over your book for you. That's what would happen if you go through Penguin Random. Now, look, that doesn't mean to say if you ever get the chance to publish a book through Random House or Harper, whatever, go do it. That would be great. But when you're self-publishing, look, you got a typo, no one's going to care. There are books from indie authors that have, and I'm not even going to name names. There are indie authors that I've read that have run these huge campaigns on something like Kickstarter, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I get the printed book after that. There's still typos in there. And you know what? That's okay. Didn't change anything about my reading experience. Same thing with like, if I put out this book, look, this is a self-published indie book, 100%. Did I do the best that I could to make sure that there weren't typos? Of course. I used Pro Writing Game. I used my own eyeballs. I used the spell checker that's naturally built into Scrivener. Do things still slip through the cracks? I bet they did. And that's okay. Because here's the deal, and your mileage may vary. If you're reading this book and I know there's not enough mistakes in here, and I know I'm just talking about spelling, but like, bear with me for a second. I know there's not enough mistakes in here to actually take away from the story. If they say good writing is invisible, right? If your manuscript that you're sending out to be printed, to have people read, has enough mistakes that other people are saying, like, this still needs to be edited, that's when it can become a problem. Now, you're saying like, I feel like my story sucks. The thing is, a lot of authors do. I can tell you exactly why. Everyone, come on, huddle in. I'm going to make us all feel seen, all feel heard, and I'm going to explain to you exactly why when you are writing your book, even if you are finishing your book, if you're about to finish, if you're in the editing process, you start to feel like this doesn't have the magic. All this would have, like, where's the flair? Where's the feeling I would get from reading a story? And, I thought I did a great job on this. And now it just feels so, like, flat. Or it feels so predictable. Let me say this with my chest. You have stopped experiencing your story as a new thing. You are only experiencing this story as someone who has been wrapped up in it for hours and hours and hours. That is why you feel that way. And look, this is it. This is exactly why it happens. I wrote this, and then I maybe edited it like 6 times, which means I've read this book. I'll tell you, I think I probably read this book maybe 10 times. Who enjoys, unless it is a greatest of all time book, who is enjoying their 10th read through of a book? Especially when you do it weeks apart. You know what's going to happen. You are no longer experiencing it as a new, fun, exciting thing. You are experiencing it as a thing that you've been around for way too long. That will always be there. That will always get in your head. Joe says, I need to find the Men in Black to have them neuralize me so I can forget my story. How many times have you seen someone online say, I wish I could forget this book and read it again for the first time? That first time that you go through that story, the first time you experience that world, those characters, the plot twists, and we're not even talking about the greatest of all time books. We're not talking about the books that are known for sucking you in to doing that sort of, feeling that sort of way. But you have put so much time and effort into this thing that you no longer have that perspective. That gets in my head for sure. Margaret says, I'm sure part of it's insecurity, but I know the reason I had to rewrite is because I was well below an expected needed skill level. I don't know how to tell that if I'm at that benchmark yet. That's a hard one. Here's the thing. When you write a story, what's the right way to say this? You have to realize when you put out a book, and of course I'm going to use this as my example. This is not my magnum opus, and I'm okay with that. In fact, there may be a time when I look back on this book, and I'm using this as an example. I don't think I'm actually going to feel this way ever, but there may be a time or a world where I look back on this book and I'm like, oh my gosh, what an amateur. Because I know I'm going to grow as a writer. So are you. But put that book out anyways. Because this is forever going to be a checkpoint in my writing career. And then maybe one day I write a book. I do choose to go get it. You know, hopefully I'm lucky enough to choose to pursue traditional publishing and get selected. And that book goes out on the shelves and people love it. I won't look back at this book and be like, oh God, what if people find this book? I'm going to look back at this and be like, look at how far I've come. So like, the thing is, I think you still put that story out. I think you do it to the best of your ability. Maybe that means rewriting it. I don't think it does, but maybe, I mean, you know your story better than I do. I just want you to learn from my mistakes. Maybe it means that you make changes, you do some editing. Maybe it means you pay for an editor, whatever the case may be. Put out that story because it's simply a check mark in, you know, where you've been so you can get to where you will be. He says, the cast of my first theater production were all shocked when people laughed so much. Just a result of how much time you spent with the story. That's how I feel. Your mileage may vary, but that's definitely something to keep in mind. So, I hope that makes sense. Just know that all of those feelings, like, I totally get it. I also have been writing mid-sentence and been like, dang, like, why am I doing this? And that's usually when I need to go, you know, get a sip of tea or like go for a walk outside or something and be like, you know, I was just in my head. And it's never as simple as being like, you know what, I'm going to choose to no longer be in my head. If it was that simple, that'd be pretty sick. But it's not. Yeah. What else we got here? Other features. I showed you revision mode, going to format, revision mode, and doing all this. You can also do non-destructive editing. That's going to sound crazy. Let's say I'm doing my second revision and I said, let's enter revision mode. I'm going to delete this. See if it does it. I'm going to get rid of this line and I'm going to rewrite it. And this is going to be part of my revision. You can choose to do non-destructive editing, which is maybe you want to change this line, but you're worried that if you completely delete it, you won't be able to revert back to it, or, you know, whatever the case may be. If you choose to go to format, and there's probably a shortcut here that I would use in real life, and strike through something and rewrite this line of dialogue to something better. Imagine that I did that. When you're choosing to export your story into like a PDF so you can go do your more editing, share it with someone, you can choose to have it purposefully ignore anything that's struck out. So non-destructive editing, if you're scared of deleting large chunks of your story, you can keep them in your editor, but they won't be present in your final product. And that's just a checkbox you can check when you're compiling. So that's kind of nice. I think there's a setting out here to strike things out instead of backspacing them. I can't remember where it is, though. I use that a lot as a big fan of non-destructive editing. What up? Shout out my non-destructive editors. So stupid. One day I gotta stop. Let's see what else. Any other cool features in Scrivener? When you're doing your planning, maybe there's someone out here that would really like this. Let's say I have a scene where I'm introducing a character like Goose. And I want to Let's say I have a big old file and I need to link off to something. You know what would be cool? Is if I could right click on that, go down to link to document, and then hey, it even suggests right here that I link this word to the character sheet for Goose. I can click on that, and now whenever I select that, it opens up my character sheet for Goose on the right side. This can be good, especially for locations. I find that really handy. These don't show up in your compiled end result. It's just for your own benefit. If you are linking to a page that exists in your project verbatim, like George here, it even here it says open George Fairman. I can click on that and get his character sheet. Now that one popped up in the same editor, but you kind of get what I'm saying. Link to document, George Fairman. Now when you click it open, hey, there's George, even though I don't have anything there. I find that to be a cool feature that I have not yet used to its full potential. If you use Scrivener for tabletop RPGs, though, which there are a ton of people that do, that would be awesome. I don't think there's anything else specifically that come to mind. Let's hop back over here into our PDF. Let's talk about publishing. So one of the big features of Scrivener, one of the big reasons I use it, is called compiling. And it's a button that you click in Scrivener to get your project and all your words out of Scrivener somewhere else. It's your export. And there are an insane number of settings, and it can get so complex, but that insane number of settings helps you be able to make it look exactly how you want it to look. This is big. So like, it feels so good to get your story out somewhere, whether it's a PDF, whether you want to put it on your Kindle as an EPUB file, which you can use a feature on Amazon to just email it to your Kindle and you have it there 2 minutes later. You can do this whole process in less than 2 minutes and have your book on your Kindle so you can read, so you can edit, whatever the case may be. But this is also how I formatted my book to put it up on Amazon, so it can be a printed copy. So it can be an ebook someone could read. Whenever you are ready to compile, if you go to File, down here to Compile, you're gonna get this pop-up. And this is where things can get crazy. I was getting a little crazy earlier. I need to check all these boxes now for our example. So bear with me. These will normally be checked for you. But these are the settings where you can go through. Oh, geez. Why did I uncheck all of these? This is how you format your book for exporting. This is also how you make sure like your cover is attached and you make sure that everything is there how it needs to be. This is a huge feature of Scrivener. All right, so how does this work? So you can either say, I'm going to compile it for PDF. I'm going to send it to a printer, docx. If you're crazy, plain text, I guess. EPUB, Markdown, all kinds of stuff. Final draft if you're doing screenwriting. You can choose whatever thing you want to do. Let's say I want to compile it for PDF. I can choose over here a set of like predetermined. I'm trying to think of the right word. Templates maybe. Let's say manuscript times. Let's say compile. Click on that. Give it a name. Desktop example output. That's totally fine. Replace that bad boy. And then it's going to take, in this case, my 50,000 word story, and then just compile it. And in this case, open it up. So that's all done. And that's how easy it is to get your story out of Scrivener and into a PDF or an EPUB or whatever the case may be. Now you'll notice here, I'm missing something. I am missing, let's see if I can find a good instance here. I'm missing things like chapter titles and page breaks. Those are all settings in Scrivener that you click on when you're doing your compile. It is totally worth reading some tutorials, watching some YouTube videos. It is really hard. It is really hard to do so. But it's worth it. Here's one thing I can do. I can click into one of these templates and choose to edit it, and there's all kinds of things you can do here. But the big cool thing here is I can click test in the bottom left, and it'll just do another one of these example outputs. And I'll just replace the one I did before. And this is the one I used for the paperback book. This is me choosing the font that I wanted to use, when to do things like the page breaks and the new chapter headings, how they should look. Should my chapters have numbers or not? Should they have little titles? That's all Scrivener. That's Scrivener, baby. How many pages we got? It should be like 299. Ooh, 299. And now it'll open it up for me to see it in my PDF viewer of choice. Includes my copyright, my little dedication to my wife. Chapter 1, Green Skies. You can see I even have the first 4 words that are in capital letters. So yeah, that's a really cool feature of Scrivener. It's super powerful. The thing is, it is kind of complex. So it is definitely something that it probably took me about 2 days of tweaking to get it to the point that I wanted, with the right font, with the right chapter headers, doing everything I could to limit like a chapter ending in a place where there was only like 2 lines of text at the top. But that's some indie publishing stuff that happens. Is it possible to add illustrations or no? Margot asks. It is possible. You actually just include those images in your manuscript over here. So you would take your image and just throw it in on one of these pages. Or you can even add it as its whole own document, and every single, see if I can get that pulled up, every single file that you have has what's called a section type. I hope you guys can see this. This is how you choose how that thing should be formatted. For me, I mean, every chapter is the section type of scene. And this is where I say, like, take the chapter number, take the chapter title, and then add like a line break or 2. Here's the text for the rest of the chapter. What you would do, Margot, in your case, is, or what I would imagine you would do, because I'm also not an expert at all the settings here with compiling, is create a new section type, not called scene, but maybe called illustration page. If you wanted to have like an entire page worth. If this is going to be an illustration for, I don't know, just between some text, you could just put it in your manuscript, have it centered. You can play with the formatting for like where the margins are. All of that would still be done in compiling. If you wanted to have like full page illustrations, what I would do is throw in a file with that image in your scene structure. And then you would use the section type to say, this is not a chapter per se, this is an illustration page. And then you set different rules about like margins and formatting and what can be expected on that page than a regular chapter. It definitely would take some playing around because, like I said, there's just a lot of settings. All kinds of things. If you click over here to settings, do you want the comments that you have from your doc? Do you want to include footnotes or remove them? Are those footnotes for the reader or just for your own sort of editing or drafting process? If you have different text color, like you've done all those revisions, remove the text color. All kinds of little things like that. That's compiling. Wow. How fun. Lots of different stuff. Looks like I also have over here front and back matter. I'm going to keep this one real short. There is a section that comes in every Scrivener like template called front matter and back matter. When you're compiling, these are those extra pages before your story that you might want present in a paperback, but maybe not an ebook. So you create a folder in each one of these front and back matter sections that have the content that you need in these different mediums, right? So in my paperback book, I have my title page, Starlight Farms Kennel for Talking Dogs. There it is right there. I have my copyright. I have my dedication, and all of these are just different pages here, but I don't necessarily want all of those present in my ebook. So same thing with the back of it. I added a little QR code to my YouTube channel. The grind never stops. Sigma lifestyle. I put that in the back of the paperback in case anyone finds the book that doesn't know that I have a YouTube channel. And then maybe they can pursue their own path of writing. But maybe I don't want that on my ebook or something. So that's front and back matter. Just makes the publishing life a little bit easier. Neat. All right, so let's talk publishing, because one of the big decisions and one of the most exciting ones to make is your book cover and your book title. And I got some spicy things to bring up. How did I choose my title? Well, I looked at a bunch of different cozy fantasy stories, made some mental notes about what the genre seemed to like to do with their titles. A lot of the titles, some things were really short and sweet, like Legends and Lattes. Some titles were pretty verbose, like Can't Spell Treason Without T. But a lot of them really seem to focus on what makes this book unique. And a lot of times that was like a, what's the right word? That was like a profession almost. Legends and Lattes was about a coffee shop. Can't Spell Treason Without Tea was about someone running a tea shop. Or again, this was a very common genre thing to do in cozy fantasy. And so I was like, I don't really want to call like my book like something farmer, dog farmer, So after playing around with it a bit, I knew that there was a couple things I wanted to do. And we're going to talk about whether or not this works or not. Starlight Farms, Kennel for Talking Dogs. I chose that entire phrase as my title. General convention would tell you that a short book title is better. But I overrode that advice because of the genre of my book. Is that correct? Is that wrong? Is that a big old mistake? A big old goose egg for Carson? I don't think so. But if you're not in or familiar with the cozy fantasy genre, then this book title seems like a little too much. Starlight Farms, Kennel for Talking Dogs. Is it easy to say? I have a lot of practice, but for most people, probably not. Try saying it yourself. Starlight Farms, Kennel for Talking Dogs. Thank you for the free publicity. I appreciate that. All right. There's probably another title out there for me to emphasize the important things about this book. The important thing for me was that at a very quick glance, you should know that the big selling point here was the idea of a fun book with talking dogs. And for that, I'll say mission accomplished. Now let's talk about the cover. I'll bring up the Amazon page so you can see. Let's talk about the cover. I failed at one major thing with this cover. So let's talk about how you get a cover, for those who don't know. You need to find a book cover artist. Walter, you're killing me. I'm just kidding. You need to find a book cover artist. Maybe you're like Margot and you're talented enough to do your own book cover. That's awesome. Liam says it's a cute title. Thank you. Maybe you're talented enough to do your own book cover, but most of us, you're going to work with a book cover designer. I used Fiverr. Let's talk about something really prevalent right now in the world of being an author. And that is AI. Everyone has their own definition of what's good, wrong, good, bad, whatever the case may be with AI. General consensus is going to be definitely do not use AI for your book cover. I agree with that personally. I agree with that. I think that for such a big decision, you probably want to work with someone. Here's why. I found an artist on Fiverr, and I reached out to them, and I was like, hello. I love your art style. Here's the book I'm writing, because they wanted you to message them first before paying anything. Here's the book I'm writing. Here's like my current vision. They were like, that sounds great. I will work on that. Let's talk about how I found that artist. I found that artist by looking through hundreds of other book cover designers on Fiverr, on Reedsy, on whatever pages I was looking at. There are more budget conscious ways for you to get a book cover, right? One of those ways, see if I can remember what it's called. One of those ways is that there are websites that have pre-made book covers. The Book Cover Designer is the website I know of. These are covers that are pretty much fully, they're done already. And if you find one that fits the story that you want to tell, you can replace the text on it, basically. You can hop over here. You can see title, text, colors, book cover size can change based on your book. You can get free minor changes. The current size is for a 6x9 book. That's important. That's called the trim size. This is a paperback design, as well as this one is an extra $20. You get a free mock-up of your book cover for your social medias. I sell each cover only once, so that this would be like, you know, you're not going to see your exact same book cover in someone else's. Here's the deal, though. This is not any cheaper than working with a book cover designer. I paid less than this to go to an artist and have them hand draw my book cover. And because of that fact, I don't think this is the right move for a lot of authors. Here's the other thing, though. There are some authors that the book cover is not really a huge decision. I know that sounds weird. Of course it is, right? There are some authors. There's a podcast I used to listen to, and I highly recommend the podcast. It's called Six Figure Authors. They're no longer doing new episodes, but they have a ton to read through or to listen through. And what they would do is, these were authors that were very prolific. They were writing lots of series of books. They were successful in all of their endeavors with writing because they had built such a big backlog of books. They were running it like a business. They were running sales. And at this point, when the purpose is getting the next book out, what these authors would do is they go to an artist and they'd be like, let's use this one as an example. This Kingdom of Magic. I want this book cover in 6 variations of different colors and symbols. And here are the titles. And their entire series would be basically this cover with minor changes in color and symbols. And done. That decision's made. Now it's just about writing the books and putting the books out and getting them into readers' hands. I think for most people who are writing their first book or early in their career, the cover is a huge decision to make, because this is your book. Now, when I was looking at Fiverr for a bunch of artists, I had a tough decision to make. As a content creator about writing, this was my first offering to the world. In a time where AI is so, right now, villainized in the writing space, I was terrified to work with any artist that had a style reminiscent of what could be generated with AI. Because I had videos where I used Midjourney to generate images for just background plates, things that were not that important, and received a lot of negative feedback because of it. And that doesn't bother me. But it would bother me if that was often recited back to me about the book I worked really hard and published with. Now, I don't know if these artists on Fiverr used AI in their workflow, were completely, reliant on AI, or they just happen to be artists with a style similar to what we see a lot of as AI generated images. So there were other visions in my head for this cover, but I actually had to sort of take a pivot to go with an artist that had a very distinctive other style, because of the fear that someone would be like, I can't believe you used AI on your book cover when I hadn't. And that's specifically something I think that's a more public facing kind of situation, but that was very prevalent on my mind. So this book cover was hand drawn by a lovely artist. If you watched my video on writing Starlight Farms Kennel for Breaking Dogs, crap, what did I just say? Starlight Farms Kennel for Talking Dogs. If you watch my book on publishing, I have a link to their page if you like this style, want to use it for your own. Yeah, but she was great. I think this cover fails one very important thing. And I honestly wasn't never even considered this, but it makes a lot of sense in hindsight. The way that this book cover failed was simply the fact that you cannot tell what age this book is meant for, what age group or age of reader this book is meant for. And that is 100% the fault of me choosing this art style and the fact that it has dogs. 100%. Now, this was me trying to recreate the sort of like fantastical, fantasy-driven, whimsical kind of nature of cozy fantasy. If you look at things like Legends and Lattes, I'll pull it up here so you can see. That is a very... It's got illustration, but it's not necessarily the same kind of like, what age group is this book for? Let's see if I can pull it up. Give me a link in new tab. Where we at? This is Legends and Lattes, right? Same kind of painterly style of illustration, but the fact that, you know, the content of the cover is, you know, maybe not clearly you know, it doesn't really raise questions of what age group this book is meant for. But this book has not really any targeted age group. This is kind of meant to be like an all ages book. But simply the cover design portrays that in a different light. So that was one way that I failed on this book, I think. Something that I will better keep in mind for my next book. What do you think? Just Guy says it's not a kid's book. It's not necessarily a kid's book. It is a book that doesn't have any adult themes, but kind of, I mean, like, still is really meant for, I would say, like 12 and up. I think a kid younger than that may not be as interested in it, but like, that's one of the ways that this book cover doesn't succeed, right? So I'm very conscious of that. I've thought about the idea of like re-releasing this with another cover one day, but that kind of hurts my heart because I do like this. Margaret says, I'm still debating this for my own story. Yes, there are darker backstories, but with the right restriction, it's not like explicit. I think you have to say, who is, you know, if there was a target age group, if I can nail that down, who is this? Who is this book for? And for me, this is meant for more mature readers, not because of, you know, any sort of content warning, but because it's about found family. The main characters are an older couple, right? They're like middle-aged. They're not, you know, a kid's book. Name another kid's book that has a main character who is in their late 30s, early 40s. Liam says, can't you say that is for all ages? I do say that. In fact, I have 2 listings here on Amazon. I don't fully get how they do it, but I do specify on Amazon this is an all ages book. Here's something that frustrates me. I told Amazon that like you can read this book if you're like 8 and up, you'll like it. But the way that they do that is they say Amazon's like, great, 8 and up, you can read this book if you're from 8 to 18. And I'm like, dang, now it looks even more like a kid's book. Mr. Slossman says, how do I make a scene where a character is listening to a song without getting copyrighted? I mean, you can name the song. You just can't go through and write all the lyrics out. Lyrics are copyrighted. A lot of books don't have illustrations too. Yeah. I feel like there's appeal for younger audiences if I cut out the swearing of Margaret's book, but I prefer to hit PG-13. Yeah, it's a tough one. Then you get to the business side of things. Like, you know, I think like the book I'm writing right now, Upon Careless Gray Hills, is very much like an adult thriller, you know? Starlight Farm's Kennel for Talking Dogs is all ages. Now, Walter says, should you copy or study other all ages art? You definitely should. I did not. You could always go with the safe bet. I mean, honestly, I think this kind of book cover is like the right move. But think of how many book covers are out there that aren't nearly as illustrated as something like this, but it's mostly just the title. I mean, think of, you could have half of this book cover just be the fur of some dog running by, or even a symbol of a dog, and then Starlight Farm's Kennel for Talking Dogs. Boom, there you go. Like, it could be as simple as that. Or you could put more effort into it and do something like this, but now you have this risk of, okay, is my message for the reader? Because this is the first thing that a reader sees to determine whether or not they should pick up this book. Is that successful? So, I think that's everything here. Let's talk about publishing. A lot of times I see in the Discord people asking, should I self-publish or traditionally publish this book? I'm going to tell you right now, it is harder and harder to justify the time and the effort and the emotional roller coaster that you might face pursuing only traditional publishing. Even authors that have made it in the traditional publishing space speak very plainly about, it's not just the quality of your work that determines whether or not you get traditionally published. It is the quality of your work, how well crafted you may have put together something like a query letter, your agent and how they're presenting the book to traditional publishers, the current state of the market. If you write a zombie book right now, which was incredibly popular 10 years ago, if you write a zombie book right now, there may be plenty of traditional publishers that say that's not trendy. We're looking more for romantasy-driven books right now because that's what's trendy. So you have to be aware of the trends. And on top of that, you still have to be really lucky that your manuscript is seen by the right person at the right time. Now, what does traditional publishing get you that self-publishing doesn't? It gets you a team of editors, book cover designers, marketing, and it gets you in bookstores. Self-publishing, on the other hand, let me expand on this traditional publishing. In return of those things, you make, it's insane. I can't quote the exact number. I can't remember the exact number. In royalties, you're making in the single digits of percentage. I've heard the number 3% quoted as the royalties you make for each book sale. Now, you do get an advance. A traditional publisher gives you X amount of dollars in return for the rights of publishing your manuscript when it's ready. But here's the thing. Let's say that publisher gives me $5,000, which in reality, if you're a new author, you are not going to be getting much more than that. Authors like Brandon Sanderson are getting literally millions of dollars for their advances because those are for sure gonna sell. You, the new writer, a lot of times from the sources I've read, the podcasts I've listened to, the books, the channels I've followed, You're lucky to get something like a couple thousand tops, because you're a gamble. Now, when your book goes on sale, you don't make any money until the publisher makes back all the money that they've spent on your advance, your marketing, and any sort of fees that they've accumulated in the meantime for working with your book. And only after they've recouped that money, now do you start getting those royalties. And like I said, you're still splitting royalties with the publisher. If you self-publish, you have to put more money up front if you want to have a similar product. That means hiring a freelance editor, working with a book cover designer, using your own, attempt at marketing through whatever platforms you choose to market with. Those are all things that you have to do, or you have to contract someone to do, that the traditional publisher would have done. Not for free, mind you. You will not have the option to get your book on bookstores across the nation. Definitely not across the world. That is something that traditional publishers have locked down. And you could reach out to your own local bookstore, maybe get something worked out. But that's probably the biggest thing that traditional publishing has locked down for self-publishers that we can't get to. If your dream is to have your book in the bookstore one day, self-publishing is not going to be the right move. If you don't care about that, self-publishing is definitely the right move. Liam says, are there any websites that talk about book trends? You can find content on Readsy, which is a great resource for authors. Also, there are a ton of podcasts that are out that are hosted by editors and agents that are specifically trying to bring that information out. I don't have any titles off the top of my head. I just know that they are out there. Podcasts might actually be one of your better bets now because everyone has a podcast. Anyways. Okay, what else am I going to say? Here's the thing. When you self-publish your book, you split some of your royalties, of course, with the website that you post your book on. But as opposed to getting 3% royalties, on like my ebooks on Amazon, I get 70% royalties. That's the benefit. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff there. Do you have to publish on Amazon? You do not. There's kind of two mindsets about it. There is, I'm going to publish on Amazon exclusively. Why would you do that? Why wouldn't you also put your book out in the world in other places? You would do that because Amazon has such a huge market of indie publishing, of books as a whole. Think of how many people that you know that have Kindles versus how many people have Kobo e-readers. I don't know. You're probably only able to think about people who have Kindles. On top of that, because like that's kind of like a way to look at it. Amazon has a monopoly on books, basically. You can go to the bookstore, but it is so hard to get as much traction on another platform as you could get on Amazon. Margaret says, I've never heard of the other thing that you said. The second, in the e-reader space, the Amazon Kindle is the number one, 100%. And the Amazon Kindle does everything that it can to lock you into the Amazon ecosystem so that you're buying your ebooks through Amazon. Now, technically, you have Libby or Overdrive that can hook into the library. Technically, you can get other files onto your Kindle, but think about the extra steps that you have to go through versus when you can click one button, not even a button, touch your finger on the touch screen of your Kindle and get that ebook on your Kindle seconds later. Kobo, K-O-B-O, is the next leading competitor in the e-reader space. And honestly, I think they have some pretty great devices and they have a more broad ecosystem. Here, I'll show you over here. This is Kobo. They have tons of ebooks. This is sort of like the main, what's happening here? Sort of like You know what? I bet this is a ad blocker thing. We back. Kobo is sort of the main competitor to Amazon in the ebook market space. So here's the deal. If you choose to publish exclusively on Amazon, you can get a much higher royalty percentage. Versus if you choose to publish non-exclusively on Amazon, so you can also publish on ebooks.com, on Kobo, on other sites that maybe you want to represent your book on, especially when we're talking about internationally. At that point, you get less royalty from Amazon, but also these other markets are not nearly as prevalent. That's some writing business for you. Go here to science and fiction and fantasy. So, you know, in this kind of case, like the kind of books you're going to see over here are going to be all the big ones, of course. Maybe every now and then you have an indie book that cracks into the top sections here, but the true fact of life is that you post a book on Amazon, and if you choose to exclusively go with Amazon, you will have your book seen by more people and make more money than if you were to post over here. But there is also different markets. And you may say, maybe it would be beneficial for me to take a less of a royalty from Amazon, post in different places, and get a wider market of people. But that's one of the decisions you have to make when you're becoming an author. You know, there's something else on here called Publisher Rocket. Here's the deal. When you publish on Amazon, there are 10 very important decisions you have to make. And if you probably don't know this if you've never published a book. When you choose to publish a book on Amazon, and this likely extends to other platforms as well in slightly different ways, you need to tell Amazon what kind of people would like your book. And the way that they do that are through these things called categories. You are allowed to market your book in 3 categories. Only 3. Now here's the question. How in the world do you choose the right categories? Here's the deal. What this correlates to, if I go back to my Amazon page, it's these breadcrumbs. You see it says books, teen and young adult, science fiction, and fantasy. Teen and young adult, science fiction, you know, maybe I have it in there. I can't remember if these were my final decisions or not. I don't think they were. But you have to choose sort of the breadcrumb trail for how your book is organized in this huge, massive Amazon ecosystem. And this decision is very important. But here's the thing. You need to, 1, reflect your book accurately. But 2, make sure that there are enough people that can find your book. Liam says, people get mad when you categorize your book wrong. So I've learned on BookTube. Let's talk about why that is. And you know what? I'm going to show you. Where is the Publisher Rocket? I'm going to show you exactly why this matters. There's a piece of software offered by the people who own Kindlepreneur. It's called Publisher Rocket. And this is a way for you to understand what categories on Amazon you should choose for your book. And the way this works is I'll go to categories, click on here. And let's say I have a fantasy book. See if I can go find this. These are all the different categories on Amazon, by the way. Some of them are marked as ghost, meaning they're no longer used. Don't want to choose that one. Some of them are marked as duplicates, which has some negative impacts. Oh my God, I think they're going to make me update. choosing a category that's a duplicate or a ghost could harm the discoverability of your book. It could put you in a section of Amazon that's more diluted with competition, harder to stumble upon your book, or put you in a place that no one's traveling to. That would not be good, right? So let's go epic fantasy. We only want books. So here's why this matters. Okay, every category. Now, if you've never seen something like this, I'm about to blow your mind. Every category has a page for the top 10 best-selling books in that category. If I click back over here and I go to books, teen and young adult science fiction, see if I can find it. See if I can find one of these top 10 pages. Nah, I can't find it. All right, either way, every category here, and I don't think it's smart to click around on Amazon on a live stream. Who knows what'll happen. Every book on here has a top 10 page where discoverability is heightened. A page where if you search for something like fantasy books, you can land on a page that says, hey, by the way, I know you're looking for books. Here's the most popular ones right now. If you, as an author, can write a book that sells enough to crack into the top 10, you get a bunch of free eyeballs on your book. And each one of those people viewing your book could potentially buy it. That's huge. And if I was to choose something like books, teen and young adult, science fiction and fantasy epic, to get into the top 10, I need to sell 114 books in one day. To make it to number 1, I need to sell 535 books in one day. Versus if I was to put my book into just science fiction, fantasy, epic, I need to sell almost 1,000 copies of this book to crack the top 10. And to be number 1, I'd have to sell 2,250 books. And if I click on this insights page, I get more information. I get information like what's the trend for this category. Someone was asking about trends. I get things like what's the average rating of the book? How long are the books staying in the top 10? I think is what this one is. Average price. There's something else here. Here it says epic fantasy books tend to be longer. Can confirm. And they usually get a lot of ratings. See if I can find. There's one other thing I wanted to show you here. If I click on this, I think it'll take me to that page. Oh, here's our top 10. This is what it looks like. So this is like the epic fantasy bestsellers in epic fantasy. Wind and Truth, Onyx Storm, Fourth Wing, Wind and Truth, Iron Flame, Wind and Truth, System Universe, a lit RPG, Fourth Wing, Onyx Storm, Court of Thorns and Roses, Fourth Wing, Iron Flame, Court of Thorns and Roses, Onyx Storm, Throne of Glass, Court of Mist and Fury, Way of Kings, Fourth Wing. Now, here's the deal, is like, this is an extremely popular section, okay? We know we're going to see popular books here. But let me show you this. There's something else I wanted to look up here. In addition to the idea of choosing your categories, you also choose keywords. Okay? Keywords are search terms that you want to correlate to your book. Again, helping people find your book. And so you have to be pretty intentional about the keywords that you choose. And Publisher Rocket also does this. So epic fantasy, right now, here is what we're seeing in epic fantasy. This is gonna blow your mind. I kind of trust this, I kind of don't. Fourth Wing is making $1.3 million in sales a month. $59,000 in sales a day. $15. Now, that's a huge book. I do believe that. I think it's that popular. Let's scroll down here to The Way of Kings. Way of Kings is still making $50,000 a month, $2,000 a day at the $8 price point. You can use this for research, but also I wish I could find, there was something I was looking for here that actually tells you about, here we go. This is what I was looking for. These same keywords, I can click on here and I can see how many people are searching for this keyword a month. How many people are going to Amazon and typing in epic fantasy? How many books are being published? How many books are people buying in this this keyword to see how competitive the industry is? Right? So in this case, there are a ton of people looking for epic fantasy for this keyword, and it's pretty competitive. Okay? Let's say, remember these numbers, 25,000 a month, 65. Now this score it tells you how hard it would be to rank your book for that keyword, with 0 being the easiest and 100 being the hardest. Let's say you write a niche cozy fantasy book. Cozy fantasy is getting 1,700 searches a month, and it's very competitive. There's more than 1,000 numbers of competitors. It's 239 pages on average. Compared to epic fantasy, those numbers are very different. Now, this is for these specific keywords, which means when you're choosing to publish, you actually have to go through and be very intentional for the keywords you want to choose, because this is the predominant way that readers can find your book organically. Why do I use that word organically? Because you can pay to have people find your book. That's called Amazon ads. And look, if you can have people find your book organically by using the right keywords, by setting yourself up for the most success that you can, do it. Because every other non-organic person that finds your book, you're paying for. And that's how it is. That's how it's going to be on any platform. You're competing with a lot of other people for people to see and or buy your book. So that may be something you've never even sort of considered before. That's the writing business that happens after you publish your book. Like, for example, you can see I have book talk books. Down here is one of my keywords. Let's go see what book talk books is looking like. Book talk books has 12,000 searches, and 66 is like the arbitrary number that they give you for how hard it is to break into a top 10. Why did I choose book talk books? You know what? Every now and then I see people talking about cozy fantasy books. I'll give that a shot. Maybe my book will find its way into a book talker's hands one day. But you know what? The numbers here look good enough for me to try. So that's what your keywords are for, trying to get your book into the right space. You can see I have things like light fantasy. I found out that was another keyword for this kind of story besides just cozy fantasy. So that was a keyword I now needed to be aware of to put my book out there. There's a whole other side of writing business. You can see how intentional you have to be. There are other tools like this, and I'm gonna be honest, I've got some drama with Kindlepreneur. There are other tools to use that can get you the same information. This one's pretty sleek. I think it's pretty good. I would recommend it. It gets you information. It's still up to you to use that information correctly. All right, let's wrap things up here. It's about dinner time over here. Let's talk about wins. In regards to this book, this story, this entire process from idea to publishing, what went right? I think some things I nailed on this were the characters. And other readers may have different feelings towards that. I really enjoyed writing the talking dogs. I ended up finding these personalities there that were exciting to write about. I ended up really enjoying writing the perspective of Rachel and Marcus, who initially started out as kind of a surface level relationship, but developed into something that was much deeper, with a lot of history behind it, where they needed each other and where they supported each other in the most important ways. That was never even something I jotted down in my notes. That felt great. I think that the vibes of this book, the idea of like the atmosphere, the world of the story could be better, but the atmosphere felt good. The cover, I still like the cover, even though I can acknowledge that it fails in that one very particular way. And then after grabbing a couple different sample copies off of Amazon, this book feels awesome. This book feels like a good book to read. It's just floppy enough. It's the perfect size. Sometimes you get a book and like your hand cramps up when you have to hold it like this for so long. This doesn't. If you would like to pick up a copy, there's a link below, of course. And then maybe you'll find that story breakdown even more helpful. How could this be improved? Here's the tough thing. You could always keep editing. Always keep tinkering, tweaking. What are some things that I was, continuously trying to adjust and make it better? Specifically, the role that magic plays in this world. One of the driving factors for the events of this book is that magic is leaking out of this castle, this Luminara keep. But it's not necessarily something I was trying to solve within the story. The purpose of the story wasn't for these meager farm people to be like, we have to stop the magic leaking out of the castle. It was, hey, there's talking dogs and family. But I do feel like at some point, simply putting focus on the fact that magic is leaking out of the castle, I think a more satisfying story would have concluded that part of the storyline. I also think that there are a lot of books that have these big messages, these big themes. And this book is more about the experience than it is about having a big message. But maybe some people want that big message. If there is a message, it would be the fact that, you find your family, but also sometimes you have to acknowledge that someone's life would be better in a different situation than just keeping them close all the time. And that's what happens here. I also think that just because this is cozy fantasy, there could still be more tension and drama. And so in my next book, I really want to focus on amplifying that tension and drama. And all that being said, if you guys have any questions about anything we've talked about today, for the next 10 minutes or so, hit me with them. I gave you a lot of information. That Publisher Rocket thing probably blew your mind if you had never had to consider the ecosystem of Amazon and how you get people to your book. Amazon ads are a whole different beast. I have a video on Amazon ads you can check out. Specifically about how to avoid the scam. You know what I'm saying? See if I can pull up my new video. For those who are, I'll save some cues later in my process. Okay, Margot. You can always ask them on the Discord too, by the way. Seen it, very insightful. Oh God, oh God. Okay. Says, Euphemia says, do you think that adding more plot about the magic system and an adventure to deal with it would have shifted your book outside of cozy and into regular fantasy? That's a really great question. So it's not always going to be a black and white kind of thing. You can definitely present a more regular fantasy story in a cozier aesthetic like this and probably still have the best of both worlds. But in a typical, from my experience, the typical kind of cozy fantasy story doesn't rely on a storyline of something like a quest to make the characters, compelling and doing the kind of things that cozy fantasy characters do. the primary sort of reference material that I use is Legends and Lattes, which the story is very much about someone setting up a coffee shop. And there's very little outside of that there's a little bit of conflict, there's a little bit of drama, but it doesn't rely on leaning into those fantasy specific kind of quest things to tell the story. And I think that is a distinction between cozy fantasy. But like I said, if you can always lean more one way or more the other way, and kind of, you're not going to be violating any rules. It's a really great question though. I think you can still have a quest in a cozy fantasy book and it still be a lot of fun. And so maybe I'd like to do that again in the future. I'm not done with cozy fantasy. There is something special about writing a story in this kind of world. And some readers really love it. But I'll tell you, writers, you will love this. It is like a warm hug every day that you go to write. And that's awesome. Katie says, how do you supplement your income while you were writing? Part of that's the YouTube channel. Part of that is I'm in a situation right now where I can pursue this, writing and the YouTube channel and content creation and all these things. I can pursue that right now, and it still makes sense. And the idea being that, I came from working in the tech industry, and, one of the big downsides of the tech industry is when layoffs happen, which they happen fairly recently. And when they happen, it's a lot of people. And so I was, I got caught up in some layoffs. And so then it was, scrambling for 4 months. I was, trying to figure out what I was going to do next. I was trying to get another job back in this industry. And then I started doing the YouTube channel, and a lot of things started to line up. One of them being, if I can center my career around writing and also write books, if I can be wholly invested in this, that's worth really working to make this happen and making some sacrifices to try it out. YouTube can only grow. And Just Guy is right. Like 95% of writers have other jobs as well. So it helps, number one, it helps to have a supportive partner. Definitely couldn't do this without the support of my wife, which was a big conversation that we had, and something that, I made YouTube videos about writing just because I loved writing and I like making videos, and it was like me discovering this new thing. And then the fourth video hit 50,000 views, and I was like, dang, whoa. Why are people watching this? I have a journal back here that I have kept some notes in over the past year or so, and I have a journal entry on there about people tuning in to watch that first video that popped off. And I was like, I don't understand why people are watching my videos, but like, it's so exciting. And that's, in some cases I still kind of feel that way. But it was also a time where we had a conversation of like, if this is a possibility, it would be a long time before I made the kind of money that I made working in the tech industry. But if this was a possibility to pursue that would only continue to grow, treat it like a small business, treat it like it's meant to be treated, like a platform to develop and, expand, that would be great. But it's definitely, takes a lot of time to do these things. The live streams are actually easy compared to filming the videos. The videos are all scripted, filmed, edited. I try to do fun things in them. But yeah, having a supportive partner in this case was the only thing that made it something I could really dive into. So I was in the situation where we both talked about it and identified that, this would be worth trying for a bit. Liam says, is there any keywords for epic fantasy? I assume you're talking about the publisher Rocket. It's mostly going to be about epic fantasy. It'll be keywords containing that. Epic fantasy is sort of one of those top level kind of keywords. When you think of something like book talk books, that's kind of a supplemental thing you try to slide in, and hopefully you get some traffic with. But epic fantasy, grimdark fantasy, quests, Game of Thrones, like these kind of things that are going to be associated with epic fantasy. The big thing is, if you want to be lucrative with the stuff that you put out, it's going to be like you writing a series. To write a series, it makes the most financial sense for a writer. Think of something like the Dresden Files, which has like 18 books in the series right now. About to blow your mind. If you write a standalone book and you're trying to get that book into readers' hands and you are running ads, you are paying to get that ad in front of someone who will potentially click on it and buy the book. Meaning every person who buys your book through running ads, you have to pay a certain amount for. If you have an 18 book series, you run ads on that first book, and that first book has the potential to turn into 18 sales from a reader who read the first book and then chose to keep reading them. That's how you make money as an author, is you write a series, or you write multiple series. But writing a standalone book, not so much. So biggest thing for epic fantasy, keywords. There's going to be a lot of keywords you can stumble across. I don't have Publisher Rocket open anymore, but if you're worried about getting the book into readers' hands and making a profit, it'll be writing a series. Margaret says, is there a minimum length I have to reach? I'm assuming it is recommended not to plan on sequels, but would it be sensible to leave some small sequel hooks? Or should it be avoided entirely? You should plan on a sequel if your story is, has room for it. Because it is financially smart to write a series. But then you have to write a series. Think of how, if you portray a book, like here's this book, I'm setting it up for a sequel, and you never write that sequel, then you're leaving a reader with the knowledge that the next book I pick up by Margot, I can't trust whether or not there will be a sequel. So that would not be great. Is there a minimum length you have to reach? There isn't. You have to. So the reality of it is, if you were to be the most optimal, you're going to be the most optimal author of all time, you would write a series of books where each book was as short as possible. Not because of the time that it takes, but because of things like printing fees. Even longer ebooks can have additional fees as that book gets larger in data use to store on Amazon servers. So a minimum length that you have to reach, not really. It kind of comes down to you still telling a story that readers will like, and readers being able to look at your book. Let's say it's 40,000 words for $10, but also here's a Brandon Sanderson book that's 1,300 pages for $10. All right, some people will make that decision based on things like that. Tario says, I remember watching your videos for the first time. I think I followed your channel since your third video or so. Aww, that's so nice. And the way you explain things hits my brain real good. I think that I personally have always sort of been in the role of being up on... I used to play in bands and I was up on stage in front of people playing guitars and singing. And then I did a job where I traveled and I spoke in front of people. And I always liked teaching people. And so when I was finally hey, I should make a YouTube channel, I've always wanted to try that. I very much wanted to do it in a way to help people be better writers. So it makes me so happy that you felt that way. That's awesome, Material. Thank you. Jumper says, I want to write a series. Sometimes I just worry if I make a mistake in one, then it affects the entire thing. I was talking to Rob J. Hayes about this very thing. And I said, how do you plant a seed in book 1 and pay it off in book 4? How much planning do you do in order to make something like that happen? And his response was, while you do treat, you kind of have an idea of where the overarching multi-book series is going to go, his advice was plant as many cool ideas in the first book that you want, and then trust yourself to be able to make them work out. This is your story. You control every aspect of that story. So it is all just up to you for being hey, like, you know, I'm gonna make this thing work. If you make a mistake in one, it affects the entire thing. You know what? It's kind of inevitable to feel that way. It also kind of just brings back the idea that beta readers are important. Because they'll help you catch those things. I am working on getting beta reading set up in the Discord server. I just know I have to do it in a very particular way because I have seen users who come into the Discord, you know, just to pitch their book that they wrote, and then they never interact with the community again. So I really want to make sure that in our implementation of beta reading, when you can only really do it if you're a contributing member of the community, as opposed to someone who hops in, uses the community for that beta reading, and then never interacts with it. I hope that makes sense. So I've been mulling over this for like 4 months. Just guy says, I've only been here for 5 months. That's 4 months short of a baby. Guys, here's the deal. This YouTube channel isn't even a year old. My first video came out December 28th, I think. Maybe December 30th of last year. Well, I say of last year. Because, yeah, it is still technically last year. Yeah, it hasn't been a full year. Thanks for everyone for being along for the ride. That's awesome. Margaret says, Carson, if you need suggestions, I've hosted critique circles before. I'm happy to show you my plans as an example. That would be awesome. We'll talk about it. We'll talk about it. Liam says, your YouTube channel is huge, in my opinion. I really appreciate that. So here's like the conundrum. Now that I'm like really trying to make it work, the conundrum is when things are going well for a YouTube channel, you don't care about things like the subscriber count or the views because it's just going well. And you're like, yes, this is what I should be doing. And then when it's not going well, you're like, oh no, the subscriber count, the views. It is a dichotomy. You never know what's going to happen. But you know what? I'm trying to make some big moves. Especially one of my goals this next year is collaboration with other writing creators and seeing how bringing multiple writing perspectives into different topics and situations can help people better understand other viewpoints of writing. Maybe you think you've always been a plotter or a planner because of X, Y, and Z, but now you hear someone else say something else in a big conversation that represents, you know, you're like, holy crap, I never realized I actually am like this, or that makes so much sense. You know, that's what I'm trying to pursue for this next year. Mr. Sauceman says, that's impressive. How did you learn how to edit? If you're talking about how to edit videos, I just downloaded DaVinci Resolve and I did it. I've always been pretty tech savvy in terms of like I use Blender. I do things like I've done a ton of programming, you know, all kinds of different projects. I did podcasts back in college. And so I record my own music and all this kind of stuff. So all of this stuff, it just kind of builds up the skills of learning new, in this case, software quickly. So I downloaded DaVinci Resolve. If you go and look at my very first video, if you look at my very first video, I had some high ambitions, and they didn't plan out. But here's the thing: is like you have to do something the first time to then do something the second time. You gotta do something the second time to then do it the 100th time, and all of a sudden you're better at something. I started this whole. I wanted to do. I'll probably do a video or a live stream talking about YouTube stuff. Just because I think that kind of information is always valuable to have. For anyone who's interested in starting their own. I started doing this with an iPhone and like a $10 lavalier iPhone microphone. And on a plastic table in a different room of the house. And set up my laptop behind my phone for a teleprompter. That's how it all worked. And then now look at us sitting in a different room of the house with actually this microphone's over a decade old. You got to use what you got. They always say like, hey, what's the best camera to get to do videos? It's the one that you already have. Once you know you're making videos and you like the process and you're doing X, Y, and Z, maybe then you can upgrade. And eventually that's what I did. No, I'm no longer on the iPhone. But for a long time I was. Margaret says, I was surprised your stuff was so new when I found it. There were lots of really nice comments about that in the YouTube videos, which was another really encouraging thing. If there's one thing I learned from doing my own YouTube channel is that if you stumble upon a channel with that's fairly new or has a low subscribe count, or like, you know, the views aren't super high, when you leave a nice comment, it has a huge impact. Like, it will make someone's day. Now I do that all the time. I never knew about how big that was before, but now, especially the YouTube algorithm has been like, dang, this guy like will give a chance to like smaller videos if we show it to him. So now I'm always like, dang, this video's sick. What a great job on this thing. And I just know that the other person's like, wow. Because I was also like, wow. Just guy says, how do you feel about being seen and having so many judgy eyes on you? Personally, it's never really bothered me. Like I said, I've been in a lot of situations where I've been up in front of crowds. I made a lot of mistakes up in front of crowds, misspeaking, playing guitar wrong, botching a guitar solo. So at some point though, you just kind of have to be like, that's what happens when you're up in front of people. Is like, you'll do some things right, you'll do some things wrong. Some people will say something, some people won't. So far, like, you definitely get unhinged comments on YouTube, and I survived. You definitely get unhinged comments on YouTube. But for the most part, like, so far, everyone's been pretty chill. Sometimes when you do get a crazy comment, you're just like, dang, something's happening with that person. Like, they're having a rough day. Then you get ones that just leave your head scratching. I had some video where someone commented, they were like, wow, he like scratched his hand twice in this video. What's up with that? What does it mean? And I saw that comment and I was like, oh my God, what was up with that? What does scratching the back of your left hand twice mean? Because I just had an itchy hand. But I was like, people notice everything. It's just crazy. Sometimes, hey, look, sometimes you put out a video that you're proud of and people love it. Sometimes you put out a video that you're proud of and no one watches it, and you kind of figure out things. But every time you put out something, you get better at what you're doing, hopefully. And that's kind of the mindset I go in, not only with this, but like also with writing a book. The next book that I write here will be even better than this one. Because I've learned so much, and so will you. All right. Any last questions before we wrap up? Look where we are now. I keep it moving and improve. I love it. Yeah, I think of not even a year ago, writing theory wasn't even a thought, and now we got like 400 something people in our Discord doing writing challenges in Novella November. It's just the beginning to a lot of fun things. That's a good feeling. Some days it's a successful feeling, like, aha, like this is going so well. Other days it's like, oh, I hope the next day gets a little bit better. YouTube is like the biggest thing, or like the biggest mindset thing to like figure out with YouTube is like every video you release is like an immediate performance review at work. And that can be tough. He says, you might have answered this already. How long did the story writing process take for you? This book took about 20 writing sessions, maybe a little bit longer, to get the proto draft done. Editing took about a week after I took a little break from it, because I was adding a couple scenes and just tweaking things. Then I did the dumb rewrite where I rewrote the whole thing. That took 17 writing sessions. And I know this because of the Scrivener writing history thing. I crunched those numbers before this live stream. And then after that, it was mostly copy editing. It was reading it again. It was making notes of like, did this dialogue sound right? Does this description or narration sound right? Then it was going through it again with Pro Writing Aid. Then it was reading it again as a person to be like, let me make sure that the changes I made with a tool still reflect like the human way that you would process those words. All in all, I can tell you just about the, you know what, this is cool. Hold on, I can actually get pretty close with this. I would say I probably started writing the story March 15th, and the book was published August 20th. April, May, June, July, August. About 5 months. My next one will be a lot faster, I think. Case said of this year, yeah, of this year. So this was everything was about this book was started and finished in the last year. I have a lot of stories that I'm in the midst of before I started writing this. Since then, I've learned that like, okay, like I'm gonna work on one project and finish it. But this whole thing was done in 5 months this year, and that was everything from the first idea to like putting it out on Amazon. How do you keep your beard so pristine? Trimming it. I know, pretty wild. And then every now and then I tell my wife I'm gonna grow it out big and bushy. That's what they do up here in the north. You got to keep your face warm. But and then how are you so amazing? Shout out my parents and my wife. Yeah. I think that's all we got today. This was a 3-hour stream. I was planning on a 2-hour stream, but we just had so much good information to talk about. I really like doing the live streams. I think we'll do more than just the one a year Novella November kind of thing. I don't know if it'll all be writing on stream. But the live streams are a lot of fun. I enjoy hanging out with you all. Yeah. Thanks for tuning in and like chatting with me. I hope you learned something really good. Again, you can find that PDF for the story breakdown in the Discord. It is in the live stream channel of the Discord. You can just click on it and download that totally free. Kay's off to a choir concert. Have a great job. Do a great job. Have a great job. I appreciate the extra hour. I missed most of the middle section. May go back and watch. Love it. Penguin waves. Pingwing. I'll see you pingwings later. All right, everyone. Have a great rest of the night. I'll see you in the Discord. And hey, check out the new video. It's got a fun little surprise in it. See you later.